Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the smoky, soot-covered world of medieval blacksmiths, where every day begins with fire and ends in exhaustion. Picture yourself standing barefoot on the packed dirt floor of a cramped wooden workshop, the air thick with the tang of iron and sweat. You can practically feel the heat from the forge licking at your skin as embers drift lazily upward like fireflies in reverse. It's not even dawn yet, and already the flames roar like a caged beast. Hungry for more fuel, you're wearing a rough, stained tunic that smells permanently of smoke, because laundry hasn't been invented in any meaningful way. There's no such thing as a day off, and your only tools are a heavy hammer, a set of tongs, and an anvil that's seen more abuse than the town drunk. As a blacksmith, your hands are blistered. Your back hurts like you're 70, even if you're only 24. And you probably haven't seen your own reflection in years because mirrors are for rich people. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments, because it's always fun to see where everyone's listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take the bellows in both hands and begin pumping air into the forge, coaxing the flames higher, listening to the whoosh and crackle that means you're about to get very, very warm. You can't afford to stop. Orders are piling up. Horseshoes, nails, hinges, plowshares, and every item is hand-forged, which means hours of hammering and reheating, shaping glowing metal before it cools and hardens like stone. There's no factory, no assistants, no magic machine, just you, your tools, and the bone-deep knowledge that if you mess this up, there's no plan B. The town depends on you, even though they act like they don't see you at all. Most folks think blacksmithing is glamorous, all sparks and strength and shouting at apprentices like some medieval Tony Stark. But in reality, you're a mix of mechanic, welder, and grunt labourer, soaked in grime and so deafened by years of hammer strikes that you can barely hear people anymore. Your workshop is the loudest place in town, rivaled only by the church bells, but no one ever says thank you when they pick up their perfect iron gate or their reinforced wagon wheel. You eat with one hand because the other is still wrapped in cloth from yesterday's burn, and you drink water so full of ash it crunches between your teeth. Still, it's honest work. Sort of. It's hard to tell where honesty ends and survival begins when the local lord expects his sword repaired before breakfast and won't take no for an answer. And don't get us started on swords. Those things take forever to make properly. Folding steel, quenching the blade, tempering the metal to get that perfect mix of hardness and flexibility. It's part science, part art, and entirely underappreciated. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were truly independent tradesmen, or just glorified serfs working under pressure from their feudal overlords. You dream of making something beautiful, maybe a decorative gate or an ornamental dagger, but people don't pay for beauty. They pay for horseshoes. Endless, mindless, infuriating horseshoes. And let's talk about your living conditions, which can only be described as smoky cave adjacent. Your house is attached to the forge, which means you fall asleep with soot in your lungs and wake up with soot in your breakfast. If it rains, water drips into your workshop and ruins your work. If it snows, you're cold and miserable, but the fire still has to be fed. There's no insurance. If you burn yourself, you wrap it in wool soaked in wine and hope you don't die. If the forge catches fire, well, guess what? You're now homeless, and no one is going to lend a hand, because blacksmiths don't have a guild in every village. You're not a wealthy merchant or a scholarly monk. You're just the guy who makes the stuff people need but don't want to think about. Your status is weirdly in between. You're not a peasant, exactly, but you're not gentry either. You might have a little land, maybe a pig, possibly even a wife who tolerates your eternal grime, but you'll never be important. And yet, if you vanished, society would grind to a halt. Literally. No nails, no horseshoes, no tools, no weapons. You're the backbone of daily life, even if nobody ever looks you in the eye at the market. Some blacksmiths try to improve their situation by specializing. Armorers, for instance, who make chainmail and helmets for knights. But armor is hard to make, and harder to sell unless there's a war. And let's face it, war is only fun if you're not the guy making all the stuff and then dying in it. Other smiths become farriers, focusing on horseshoeing and hoof care, which means spending all day bent over kicking hooves while trying not to get your face stomped. There's also the occasional holy blacksmith, who carves intricate iron crosses, and ecclesiastical hardware for churches, but those contracts are rare and usually go to monks with tools made of literal gold. You could try moving to a city, but then you're competing with 10 other smiths for the same few orders, and they all hate outsiders. Plus, city air somehow manages to be even worse than forge air, because it smells like sewage, onions, and despair. You're also not allowed to advertise. Guild rules, when there are guilds. So your entire marketing strategy is, hope someone walks past and notices the anvil noises. Your tools are handmade, of course. You made them. Every hammer, chisel, and tong was crafted in-house, often by trial and error, sometimes inspired by nightmares. Your hammer's handle is so worn, it fits your palm like a sixth finger. The anvil has a chip in it from when you tried to forge ironwood, a notoriously uncooperative metal that may or may not have been cursed. One time, your apprentice dropped a red-hot horseshoe on your foot, and now 2 of your toes look like melted marshmallows. But he was the best of the lot. Most run away after a few weeks, unable to handle the heat, the hours, or your temper. Speaking of temper, yours is not great. Years of scalding metal and petty villagers have left you a little crispy on the inside. You try to be patient, but when someone shows up with a broken doorknob and says, "Can't you just fix it real quick?" you have to dig deep, not to fling it into the fire. Still, there are moments. Moments when the metal moves just right, when your hammer lands perfectly and the red-hot bar sings under the blow. There's a kind of poetry in it, a rhythm, like a heartbeat made of iron. You chase those moments, even though they're fleeting, because they remind you that you're more than just a smoke-covered problem solver. You're a craftsman, a survivor, a little bit of a magician, and that, on some deeply scorched level, feels like enough, for now. You wipe your forehead with the back of your sleeve, smearing soot across your skin in a pattern so familiar it might as well be war paint. The forge crackles behind you like an impatient child demanding attention, and already you feel the heat burrowing into your bones. There's no such thing as cool in your world. Everything radiates warmth, from the glowing coals to the iron tongs you forgot were sitting too close to the flames. Outside, a rooster crows, but you've been up long before it. You step outside briefly, just long enough to take a breath of air that doesn't feel like it came from the mouth of a volcano. And what greets you is mud, endless mud. The blacksmith's yard is a soup of discarded nails, sloshed water, and horse manure, because of course someone decided this was the perfect spot to tie their steed, while they waited for you to hammer out a new stirrup. Medieval weather, as it turns out, has no interest in your comfort. Rain means your woodpile's soaked. Sun means you sweat through your only tunic. Snow means the bellows freeze shut. You can't win. And when you do lose, it's usually dramatic, like the time your roof collapsed under the weight of a freak, hailstorm, or when lightning struck your chimney and sent soot geysering into every corner of your home. No insurance, remember. Just grab a shovel and fix it yourself. You go back inside and stir the coals with a poker that glows faintly from years of use. Time to shape today's first project. A set of hinges for the chapel door. Simple work, but precise. You measure the iron bar with your eye, because who has a ruler? And begin to heat, twist, and flatten it into submission. You fall into a rhythm, swinging the hammer like a conductor leading a very loud, very aggressive orchestra. Clang. Turn. Reheat. Clang again. Sparks fly. Your shoulder aches. Your apprentice, if you still have one, hands you the wrong tool, and you swear under your breath, not because of the mistake, but because it's the 4th time this week. You miss having someone competent. Historians still argue whether medieval apprenticeships were primarily exploitative or genuinely educational, but from where you stand, it's clearly both. You provide food, shelter, and training. In return, they provide youthful optimism, boundless questions, and an uncanny knack for dropping tongs on their own toes. Still, it's tradition. Every master smith was once an apprentice, and you've got the scars to prove it. You remember your first forge, the smell of molten metal, the heat that made your teeth hurt, the way your master could identify an alloy by sound alone. It felt like magic then. Now it feels like responsibility layered over exhaustion, with a side of constant back pain. Your day is measured in fuel. You keep one eye on the coal pile and the other on the bill for this week's. Charcoal delivery. Wood is cheaper, but burns too fast. Charcoal's better, but expensive. And don't even think about importing anything fancy like coke or anthracite. You're not a king. You feed the forge like it's a living thing, and in some ways, it is. Neglect it, and it sulks. Overfeed it, and it roars to life and warps your work. It's a partnership, like a stubborn ox or a slightly resentful marriage. You finish the hinges and toss them into a bucket of water, which sizzles with satisfaction. The quenching process is both science and superstition. Too hot, and you'll crack the metal. Too cool, and it stays soft. You whisper a little prayer as the iron hisses, not because you're particularly religious, but because after 3 years of weird accidents, you're not taking chances. One time, you quenched a blade that screamed. Not metaphorically, it actually shrieked. You still don't know how that happened. Might have been the water, might have been the metal. Either way, you bless the forge afterward, just in case. You step away and glance at your hands, calloused, cracked, covered in little black tattoos of soot that never wash off. You could scrub until your fingers bleed and still look like you just crawled out of a chimney. And the smell, well, it's a mix of fire, sweat, and despair, with hints of iron oxide. Soap exists, technically, but it's rare and mostly made of lard and ashes, which, when you think about it, is basically just more of what you're already coated in. You try not to dwell on hygiene. In medieval towns, no one smells great. Your neighbor, the tanner, makes you smell like roses by comparison. He works with urine, literally, as in, he soaks hides in barrels of wee. Fringe fact, but true. So you count your blessings. At least you're not ankle deep in fermented pee. You take a moment to drink some water, boiled earlier to avoid the amoebas that want to throw a plague party in your intestines, and chew on a crust of bread so hard it might as well be a medieval dental test. Meat is a luxury, vegetables are a rumor, and spices are a fairy tale told by merchants who've never touched an anvil in their lives. Your lunch break, if you can call it that, lasts 12 minutes before someone's at the door asking if you can fix a broken cauldron handle. You can. You will. But not without sighing first. The cauldron's iron is cheap and brittle, and you know it'll crack again in a week. You do the job anyway, because you need the coin, because you need the reputation, because even though it sucks, it's still better than joining the army or becoming a rat catcher. You finish the repair, and the customer leaves you a half penny and a thank you that sounds more like an afterthought. You wonder, for the 100th time today, what it would be like to live in a world where your work is admired, where people say wow instead of is it done yet? You've heard rumors of famous smiths, people who crafted swords for kings or made weather vanes shaped like angels for cathedrals. They say one man in Florence forged a lock so perfect it couldn't be picked. Another in Damascus invented a blade that could slice a hair in midair. You dream of that kind of legacy. But here, in your tiny village, legacy looks like your initials on the base of a cooking pot. Small victories. Still, you find a strange comfort in the routine, the predictability, the clang of the hammer, the hiss of the quench, the occasional curse when you burn your thumb. Again. The days blur together, one long symphony of sweat and sparks. You think of your father, who was also a smith, and his father before him. You wonder if your children, if you have any, will take up the hammer or run for the hills. Either way, you hope they never forget that even though the work is hard, it matters. Someone has to keep the world held together with rivets and rings. Someone has to shape the bones of civilization from molten chaos. Someone has to swing the hammer, and for now, that someone is you. You start the morning with a groan, that echoes off the low beams of your workshop ceiling, a groan so familiar it might as well be your rooster's second call. Your knees creak in protest as you rise from the straw-stuffed mattress that's more lump than bed, your joints reminding you, yet again, that blacksmithing is a young person's trade, being stubbornly pursued by an increasingly not young person. The coals in the forge are dead cold now. So you kneel and begin the slow ritual of coaxing fire back to life. A few embers from last night remain buried deep in the ash, like forgotten promises. You pile dry kindling atop them, whisper encouragements, like a nervous parent, and blow gently. Sparks flutter upward like fireflies, and for a moment it feels magical, until the smoke chokes you. Coughing, you add more wood and work the bellows until the flames catch and start to purr. Already, the forge is warming the room and your bones loosen up slightly in response. You've got a big order today, shoes for 8 oxen, plus a couple of arrowheads for the Lord's gamekeeper, who insists his prey is armoured like knights. You'd love to charge more for the rush job, but bartering is the name of the game, and yesterday he traded you 3 bundles of leeks and a questionable haunch of meat for the privilege. Historians still argue whether rural blacksmiths operated more like independent craftsmen, or were bound into service by local lords, but either way, you're definitely not the one setting prices here. You rummage through your dwindling pile of iron stock and sigh. Ox shoes aren't glamorous, but they're essential. These beasts plod through fields and cartstones for the castle expansion, and if one goes lame, it's your fault. Never mind the rocky terrain or the poor feed. No, it's always your workmanship, so you measure carefully, adjust your grip on the hammer, and start shaping. The iron sings beneath your blows, and you slip into that meditative trance where time stops existing. It's only broken when your apprentice barges in, late, sweaty, and full of excuses about a goose-related delay. You raise an eyebrow, then remember your own disastrous incident with an angry goose last spring, and let it slide. Stoke the side forge, you say, gesturing with your chin. And if you burn the bellows again, I swear you'll be hammering nails for a month. He nods solemnly and gets to work, though not before knocking over the bucket of water with a clang that makes your teeth itch. Ox shoes take up most of the morning, and by midday you've got a neat stack cooling by the door. A village boy peeks in to collect them, probably sent by the drover, and hands you a sliver of cheese as payment. Not ideal, but at least it doesn't smell like feet. You take a bite, immediately regret it, and wash it down with lukewarm ale from a wooden jug. Water's not always safe, and ale is weak enough to hydrate without making you fall into the forge. You pull out a half-finished blade from a previous order, one meant for a farmer defending his land against wild dogs, or more likely, desperate thieves. The steel's high carbon, decent quality, probably smuggled from a distant city. A travelling merchant sold you a small batch months ago, and you've been rationing it like gold. With great care, you heat the blade and begin grinding it to a smooth taper. You hum as you work, not out of joy, but to keep rhythm. You remember your master doing the same. The metal dances, he used to say, but only if you give it a beat. You catch yourself tapping your foot now, almost unconsciously. Some fringe historians believe blacksmiths once worked in teams to rhythmic chants or songs, forging unity through literal harmony. You like that idea, though it's hard to imagine breaking into song with your current apprentice. He's tone deaf, and once got a hammer stuck in his boot. Still, there's poetry in the process, even if the audience is only soot-covered walls and a stubborn mouse that refuses to leave your grain bin. Around mid-afternoon, your wife appears at the door, holding a parcel wrapped in cloth. It's a spare shirt, cleaner than the one you're wearing, and a reminder that you're expected at the chapel tomorrow for St. Eligius's Day, the patron saint of metalworkers. You'd forgotten. Again. Try not to smell like a pig pen. This time, she says, with a wry smile. You nod, grateful, and make a mental note to wash in the stream later. Maybe, if it doesn't rain. You finish the blade, etching a simple pattern near the hilt. Just a decorative swirl to make the client feel special. The metal's cool to the touch now, and you test the balance with a flick of your wrist. Not bad. could have been a bit sharper. But considering you're sharpening it on a whetstone that's seen better centuries, it's passable. You sheath it in a rough leather scabbard and set it aside. Your back aches, your hands are black, and your stomach is growling. You glance out the window. It's more of a hole in the wall with a flap of oiled parchment, and see dusk creeping in. Time for one last job, a chain repair for the mill. The links are rusted and jagged, and honestly, you think they should be replaced entirely. But the miller is tight-fisted and insists on just patching it. You do your best, heating and reshaping the damaged segments, even though you know they'll fail again before the season's out. You wonder sometimes if people would respect your work more if they saw what went into it, if they understood the precision required to avoid a weak joint or a warped blade. But to them, you're just the blacksmith, a background character in their daily stories, a necessary inconvenience. You put the chain aside and start banking the coals, letting the fire settle into a low smolder. The light shifts in the workshop, turning red and orange as flames flicker lazily. You stretch your shoulders, feeling the familiar crunch of fatigue. Outside, someone is playing a reed pipe badly, and a few kids chase each other through the mud, laughing. You remember being that age, before your hands were covered in calluses, before you learned that molten iron is both beautiful and merciless, before you knew how much the world depends on things no one notices. Nails, hinges, hooks, plows, all made by hands like yours. As you clean your tools and stack them neatly on the bench, you feel a quiet satisfaction. You're not famous. You're not rich, but you are needed. And in this world, that's something. The forge flickers one last time before you cover it for the night, and the workshop grows still. You step outside, take a deep breath of cool evening air, and let the stars overhead remind you that tomorrow you'll do it all again. Not because you have to, but because no one else will. Morning again, and your body's already protesting before your eyes even open. Every joint you own has filed a formal complaint. Your palms are raw, your shoulders are stiff, and when you sit up, your back cracks like an old timber beam. But there's no time to wallow. Your apprentice has already started coughing outside, which usually means he's about to do something stupid with fire. You swing your legs off the straw mattress, scratch your beard, and get moving. Outside, it's still misty. The village is waking slowly. Carts creak over rutted paths. Roosters shout their grievances, and the smell of boiling cabbage wafts in from somewhere. At the forge, you find your apprentice fanning the fire with the enthusiasm of someone who doesn't fully grasp the danger. You take over, working the bellows with steady rhythm, and the coals respond, glowing orange like the heart of some ancient beast. Today's orders include several nails for roof repairs, a large cooking pot, and, joy of joys, a set of decorative hinges for the manor's chapel door. The carpenter who ordered them wants something fancy, which means you'll be crafting scrollwork on a surface barely wider than your thumb. Historians still argue whether artisans in your position leaned more toward practicality or took pride in flourishes for beauty's sake. You personally believe you can do both, if people would just pay for the time it takes. The nails are easy enough. You start with an iron rod, heat it, cut it into lengths, and hammer one end flat before, giving it a quick twist to taper. Tap, flip, strike, repeat. There's a rhythm to it that soothes you. Nails might be boring to most, but every building in this village would collapse without them. As you finish the batch, you remember that time a traveling preacher declared, "Nails were sacred instruments, they held salvation to wood." You tried charging more after that speech. It didn't stick. The cooking pot's next. You take a round iron plate and begin to beat it into a bowl shape, working in circles, checking thickness as you go. This one's for the baker's wife, who insisted it be light enough to carry, but strong enough for stew bones. That's a contradiction you're supposed to solve with your hands. You heat the base again and again, shaping slowly, welding on a simple iron loop for hanging. Somewhere in the workshop, your apprentice drops a hammer with a clang, then mutters a very unholy word. You pretend not to hear. Let him learn the way you did, by trying, failing, and not complaining about burned fingers. The pot finally takes shape, and while it's not a masterpiece, it holds water and doesn't wobble, which puts it leagues ahead of whatever the tinker sells from his wobbly cart. You place it carefully on the cooling shelf and turn your attention to the decorative. Hinges, this is where things get tricky. The Manor's Chapel is trying to impress pilgrims. Word is, they've recently acquired a finger bone of St. Cuthbert, or possibly a chunk of someone's knuckle, but the details are murky. Either way, the hinges need to look divine. You sketch a rough pattern on a bit of charcoal streaked board. 2 loops with mirrored scrolls, a floral curl at each end, and just enough flair to suggest holiness without making the door look like a wedding cake. The iron bar heats quickly, and you work it with smaller tools, bending tight curves with tongs and hammering precise ridges with a chisel. It's delicate work, and the heat bites faster when you're this focused. You nick your knuckle once, curse softly, then keep going. You're not about to let a chunk of knuckle ruin a commission for a chunk of knuckle. Some days, the world really is a strange loop. While you're absorbed, a village boy pokes his head in. "Master Smith," he says, "the Reeves wheel's cracked again." Of course it has. That thing's older than the church's bell and twice as stubborn. "Tell him I'll come after supper," you reply, not looking up. "And if he's in a hurry, tell him to learn woodworking." The boy runs off. You've seen 5 Reeves come and go, and the wheels survived them all. Barely. As evening draws near, your apprentice prepares to shut the side forge down. You let him. He's earned that much, even if he still can't tell oak from elm, or remember which tongs are for holding versus pinching. As you quench the finished hinges in oil, your preferred trick for smoother finish, you reflect on the smell. There's something comforting in hot iron hitting oil. A little dangerous, a little earthy, a little like roasted meat if you haven't eaten in 12 hours. You hold the hinges up to the fading light, checking their shape against the sketch. Not bad. One curves slightly off-center, but who'll notice on a door 10 feet high? You wrap them carefully and set them aside for delivery. Outside, twilight has crept in quietly. You step out, rubbing your shoulders, and watch as the first stars blink through the pale lavender sky. It smells like rain on the wind. Maybe tomorrow will be slower, maybe not. You think about the Reeves wheel, the cracked spoke you'll have to reinforce with an iron band, and how he'll still complain that it's too heavy. You think about the pot, and whether the baker's wife will actually use it or just hoard it for feast days. You think about the chapel door, and the way people will ooh and ah over the holy hinges, without realizing someone spent half a day bent over anvil and flame to make them. But that's your life. The hidden framework. The iron bones of the village. You aren't in the songs, you aren't on the scrolls, but without you, nothing opens. Nothing stays together, nothing works. And somehow, that's enough. You wipe, your hands on a rag, pick a sliver of coal from your sleeve, and head inside. Tomorrow will come early again, and with it another parade of cracked wheels, broken plows, and people asking if you can just fix it quickly. You always do. Not because it's easy, but because if you don't, who will? The next morning, your hands are still stiff from yesterday's hinge work, but the day doesn't ask how you're feeling. The forge is already warm, the coals breathing gently from last night's banked fire, and as you pull open the shutters, light slants across your anvil like a quiet summons. Your apprentice is already sorting scrap metal, humming something out of tune and occasionally dropping pieces just to hear the satisfying clink. You let him for now. Today's task isn't just a batch of tools or a couple of horseshoes. It's armor. Not a whole suit, thank God, but enough pieces to make your arms ache and your patience fray. A local nobleman, not terribly high up the ladder, but rich enough to throw his weight around, has ordered a fresh set of greaves and a breastplate. Why? Because his cousin heard rumors of bandits near the trade road, and now everyone in his bloodline wants to look ready for battle, even if they couldn't hold a sword properly without spraining something. You start with the breastplate, hammering sheet iron over a curved wooden form. The shape must mimic the body, not just for looks, but to deflect blows. You remember learning that as an apprentice yourself. Curves deflect, flats absorb. Your master used to smack you in the shoulder with a ladle to demonstrate. You're kinder to your own apprentice, but you still make him watch closely as you hammer, heat, quench, reheat, and hammer again. He's fascinated, which is a good sign. Why not just make it flat? He asks. Because flat armor gets stabbed, you mutter, sweat already rolling down your temple. A surprising number of people in the Middle Ages ordered armor without ever planning to wear it. It was more of a costume, a prop for asserting dominance at gatherings, or something to hang in a hallway next to a family crest, painted by someone who didn't know what lions actually looked like. This particular noble wants his set shiny, which means extra polishing time, and engraved, which means you'll be crouched over with a chisel later, tracing floral patterns that make you wonder whether he's confusing war gear with wedding china. Still, you begin. Hammering armor is no delicate business. Each blow must be precise. The curve of the breastplate must catch the light and angle slightly downward. Not for style, but because a sword sliding down into your stomach is not a look. You work in rhythmic bursts, alternating heat and hammering to prevent brittleness. The village priest stops by mid-morning, ostensibly to bless your hands, but really to ask if you've finished the replacement latch for the church trunk. You promise it'll be done by evening, even though your workbench already looks like a battlefield. The priest nods and mumbles a benediction, and you silently ask forgiveness for all the curses you've muttered while shaping this breastplate. As midday approaches, you finally begin polishing. You rub ash mixed with sand over the cooled plate, then switch to a scrap of wool and a mixture of tallow and crushed chalk. The surface starts to gleam faintly, like moonlight through a clean window. Why make it so shiny? Your apprentice asks. You pause, holding the plate at an angle. Because rich people want to look expensive. He shrugs and goes back to sorting nails. Historians still argue whether armourers of your class were considered craftsmen or mere labourers. You know your place in the pecking order, somewhere between essential and invisible. When the Lord comes to collect his armour, he'll inspect it, grunt his approval, maybe toss a coin at your apprentice for keeping the fire hot, and then strut off to impress his equally overdressed cousins. You'll be left cleaning the soot off your face and resetting the coals for the next job. Once the breastplate gleams to your satisfaction, you move on to the greaves, shin guards meant to protect a man's lower legs from sword strokes, angry dogs, and the occasional tumble from a horse. These are simpler, just curved plates with leather fastenings, but they must be perfectly fitted, or they'll chafe worse than rough wool. You measure twice, using a marked string from the noble's previous visit. His calves were wider than expected, probably from a diet heavy on pork and seated leisure. You make allowances, shaping the greaves into gentle arcs, not so tight that they squeeze, but snug enough to stay put. As you rivet on the leather straps, you remember the tale of a soldier who had one greave buckle fail mid-battle and tripped over his own foot into a ditch. Died of embarrassment, someone once joked. Maybe. You line up the finished greaves next to the breastplate and start on the engraving. This part you actually enjoy. With a fine chisel, you score leaf-like curls into the surface, using chalk. Lines as a guide. It's slow, meticulous work, but satisfying in a way that beating metal flat can't be. Your apprentice watches quietly, his usual chatter subdued. You ever make a full suit? He asks. You nod. Once. Took months. He died a week later in a tournament. Your apprentice's eyes widen. Didn't even scratch the armour. The afternoon drags as you complete the pattern. The armour isn't perfect, but it's symmetrical, polished, and more than functional. You doubt it'll ever see actual combat, but that's not your problem. The nobleman returns at dusk, accompanied by 2 retainers who look as bored as stone. He doesn't say much, just grunts, inspects the polish, and nods. The apprentice gets a copper, you get a promise of future work, and the noble strides off like he's heading into war instead of supper. You close the forge as the light fades, brushing filings into the corner and dousing the coals just enough to bank them for morning. The church trunk latch still isn't finished, so you light a candle and spend another hour fiddling with cold iron, your shoulders already complaining. Finally, with a satisfying clunk, the latch clicks into place. You wrap it in cloth and set. it by the door. It'll be another coin tomorrow, another prayer muttered by the priest, another invisible labor performed by someone whose name won't be recorded. As you eat your supper, bread, a bit of cheese, and something vaguely resembling stew, you think about armor, about how it's supposed to protect you but rarely gets tested, about how its value lies less in defense and more in appearances. You wonder if the noble feels any braver wearing it, or just heavier. In the quiet before bed, your apprentice asks if he'll ever make armor like that. If you don't burn the place down first, you mutter. He grins, and you realize that, exhausted as you are, this life has its moments, a forge, a fire, and a future in iron, not shiny but strong. You wake to a sound you dread. Rain. Not the light, misty sort that leaves dewdrops on the grass and feels poetic for all of 5 seconds. No, this is the steady, persistent kind that flattens everything it touches and turns the road to mud so thick you'll lose a shoe in it before breakfast. Rain means fewer people travelling. Fewer travellers means fewer broken wagon axles or lost horseshoes, and that means less coin for you. You listen for a moment, just to be sure it's not going to let up. It doesn't. You sigh, roll off your straw pallet, and stretch the stiffness out of your back with a groan that feels older than your actual age. Your apprentice is still snoring in the loft, and for a moment you consider letting him sleep. But then you remember the tools from the mill that still need sharpening and the pile of chain links you promised to repair. You call up to him, and hear a grunt in response. That'll have to do. Inside the forge, the air is already damp. You stir the banked coals back to life, coaxing them with kindling and breath. As the fire comes to, you feel a little warmer, a little more human. The forge is your sanctuary, even on days like this. You decide to begin with the mill tools, a set of large iron blades and dull teeth that grind grain. The miller had dropped, them off complaining of lazy metal. You'd resisted the urge to explain that metal doesn't get lazy. People do. Still, the blades are nicked and worn, so you set to work. Sharpening isn't glamorous. It's repetitive and dusty, and by the end of it, your shoulders feel like someone took a mallet to them. But there's satisfaction in it too. In knowing that, thanks to your hands, someone will have bread next week. A quiet, practical pride. Mid-morning, a boy comes running through the rain with a message. A hinge has snapped at the bakery. Could you come? You wrap yourself in a damp cloak and trudge through the mud to the bakery, where the warmth of the ovens is an instant relief. The baker is red-faced and covered in flour, pointing to the door like it's insulted him personally. The hinge is old, cracked through at the base. You squint at it, nod, and say you'll fix it on the spot. He gives you half a loaf of rye and a tankard of something vaguely alcoholic in return. Not a bad trade, all things considered. As you hammer out a temporary pin to hold the hinge together, the baker's wife chats to you from across the room. She's curious about the forge, asks how long you've been working metal, how hot the fire gets, whether you ever burn yourself. Only when I blink, you answer, and she laughs. It's a small interaction, but it breaks up the monotony. You finish the hinge, test it twice, and trudge back through the rain, your cloak heavier than before. Your apprentice has managed to organize the tools while you were out, which for him is a small miracle. You grunt approval and return to the chain links. These belong to the blacksmith down the road who keeps sheep. One of the fences had been chewed by a particularly enthusiastic goat, apparently, and now you're fixing metal links one by one. You start mending each loop with careful heat, overlap and hammering. It's delicate, like embroidery for people with scorched hands. You think about how everything in your work is circular. Iron rings, wagon wheels, links in a chain. Always, returning, always repeating. There's a certain poetry to it, even if your knees are beginning to disagree. One of the links has been bent so badly it's more of an abstract shape than a circle. You set it aside. Maybe make it into something else later. A clasp, a handle, a lesson in what not to do. As the day wears on, the forge gets busier, despite the rain. A tanner comes by needing rivets replaced on his belt knife sheath. A travelling monk appears with a cracked iron cross and a story about it falling from a wall during a thunderstorm. You don't ask questions. You fix what you're given. That's the job. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were community centers or just conveniently placed problem solvers. You suspect it's both. Everyone needs something mended eventually. One particularly odd request comes from a shepherd who arrives just before sunset. He's holding what appears to be the metal band from a broken cowbell. You expect a simple fix, but he wants it reshaped into a kind of pendant. For luck, he says, tapping his chest. Keeps the wolves away. You nod solemnly and get to work. It's not your place to question people's beliefs, even if this one involves wearing livestock accessories. The bell band becomes a crude oval with a hole punched at the top for string. The shepherd leaves happy, flipping you a silver penny and telling you the cows will sing your praises. Your apprentice laughs too hard at that, nearly dropping a tong, full of glowing nails. As you eat your evening meal, barley porridge with a bit of the baker's rye, you reflect on how much of your day was spent fixing things that didn't belong to you, or even make sense. You are the invisible repairman of the village, called upon for broken locks, cracked pots, with iron braces, uncooperative weather vanes, and once a panicked noble's sword that had rusted into its scabbard because he stored it near the fish barrels. That took hours. That sword's still your record holder for sheer smell. Your apprentice asks if you've ever made something just for yourself. You pause. It's a good question. You tell him about the time you crafted a tiny metal locket in the shape of a forge bellows. Just something to pass the time one winter. Inside was a scrap of wool, a keepsake from your first forge fire. You never wore it, of course. Too sentimental, but it's still tucked somewhere under your workbench. As the rain finally lets up and the moon peeks through clouds, you douse the forge and sweep the floor. Metal shavings, soot, and a few dropped nails collect in a familiar pile. You lean on your broom for a moment, listening to the quiet. Even on rainy days, even with soggy boots and goat-chewed fences, this life has a rhythm, and while it might never be recorded in scrolls or sung by minstrels, it's solid, it matters. You look at your apprentice, nod toward the door, and call it a day. Another storm weathered. Another forge of patience, grit, and a bit of luck. You're up before the sun, again, because blacksmiths don't get to sleep in, not even when your bones beg for one more hour. The air is chilly, laced with that pre-dawn dampness that seeps through clothes and sticks to your ribs. The fire is nothing but embers now, faint red pulses like the heartbeat of your entire trade, and you coax it gently with new kindling, slowly breathing it back to life. Your apprentice is slower to rise today, mumbling something incoherent from the loft above, and you resist the urge to toss a hammer in his general direction. Instead, you let him sleep just a bit longer while you begin sorting through the list of orders left from yesterday. Today is horseshoe day, not the fun kind where you forge one or two in peace and quiet. No, today is the bi-monthly village shoeing order. 8 horses, 4 donkeys, and 1 mule who, rumour has it, kicked a priest last Lent and hasn't calmed down since. You sigh, crack your knuckles, and get to work flattening bars of iron into U-shapes. There's no glamour in horseshoes, but they're steady business, and steady business means bread. As the sky lightens and the forge begins to hum with activity, you're soon knee-deep in hooves and hot nails. The first horse belongs to the reeve. Naturally, he's early, smug, and offering a hunk of cheese instead of coin. You say nothing, but hammer the shoe just a little louder than necessary. Your apprentice finally stumbles down the ladder with bed hair and an expression that suggests he dreamed of dragons, only to wake up to donkey hooves. You toss him a rasp and point to the mule's cracked shoes. You're up. He groans, but obeys. You watch him work, correcting his posture twice, then step back into your rhythm. Heat, hammer, quench, repeat. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths trained apprentices formally or just hoped they survived long enough to learn. You suspect it's the latter. You're not a teacher, not really. You're just a tired adult, hoping the kid watching you can guess what matters. Mid-morning, you're summoned to the manor by a guard who insists the Lord's armour has developed. A wobble. You blink. Armor doesn't wobble. People wobble. But you grab your tools and trudge across the muddy road toward the manor. Inside, Lord Edwin is standing in full chainmail, arms crossed like a disappointed father, pointing at his midsection. You crouch, inspect, and find the issue. His belt isn't tightened properly, and his hauberk is missing 2 side rings. You tell him as politely as possible that he's just wearing it wrong. He huffs, then asks if you can improve the shine. You explain again that armor isn't supposed to shine like a silver goblet. That's how you get stabbed. Still, nobles want what they want, and after 2 hours of buffing with sand and vinegar, you've got the thing gleaming like a tavern mirror. Lord Edwin is pleased. You get a halfpenny, and you return to the forge just in time to find your apprentice halfway through reshoeing the donkey. Progress. Back at the forge, a merchant waits with a broken scale, the kind used to measure grain or cloth, delicate in its balance. You love these repairs. They require precision, not brute force. As you tinker with the fulcrum, adjusting weights by eye and by instinct, you fall into a different pace. It's like tuning a lute. You don't hear it, you feel it. Eventually, the scales balance, and the merchant nods, satisfied. He pays, in dried figs, which is strange, but welcome. You pop one in your mouth, chewy, sweet, and a reminder that the world beyond this village has flavour. Afternoon brings a more unusual request. A travelling tinker has arrived with a small metal bird. A toy, he says, or maybe a puzzle. It's broken, its wings bent, and one gear jammed. You take it in your hands, marvelling at the craftsmanship. Someone, somewhere, spent hours crafting this nonsense, and now it's your job to resurrect it. Your apprentice watches as you work, fascinated. You think I could make one of those someday? He asks. You look at him. He's got soot on his forehead, a burn on his sleeve, and still thinks forge work is magic. You nod. Maybe, if you stop dropping tongs. The toy bird eventually clicks back into life. Its wings flap slowly, then pick up speed, and the tinker laughs with delight. He promises to return with more trinkets next month. You hope he does. You like fixing odd things. They remind you the world isn't just hinges and nails. The day winds down with a final pair of horses. One is cooperative, the other not so much. Your apprentice nearly gets kicked again, and you spend 10 minutes calming the beast with soft words and a sugar cube filched from the manor last week. Finally, you slip the shoe on and hammer it into place. The sound of metal meeting hoof, rhythmic and sure, echoes through the yard. As evening settles in, you sit outside the forge for a moment, the air cooler now, the smell of hot iron replaced by the gentle scent of nearby hay. You look at your hands, scarred, blistered, stained black in the creases. Hands that have shaped wheels, swords, hinges, toys, and tools. You flex them, feeling every ache. Blacksmithing isn't just a trade. It's a sentence, a story told through flame and force. You remember a time when you wanted to leave, to become a soldier or a monk or a map maker. But metal always brought you back. Because it needs you. Because it doesn't lie. Because it bends when you tell it to. Inside, your apprentice is sweeping, badly but trying. You decide to teach him how to make a simple key tomorrow. A real one. It's time he learned that blacksmithing isn't just about muscle. It's about trust. People trust you with the things that protect, that open, that carry and cook and close. You make civilization run, even if no one ever thanks you for it. And sometimes, under the right kind of moon, that's enough. You bank the fire, close the shutters, and lock the door. Another day finished. Another set of problems solved with heat and hammer. You sleep with soot under your nails and the soft clang of memory echoing in your dreams. Your sleep doesn't last long. A pounding on the door rouses you before dawn again. And this time, it's not the usual farmer needing a plough mended. It's a boy from the nearby abbey, panting, holding out a note sealed with wax. A monk needs a lock repaired. Urgently, the note says, though monks don't usually do anything urgently except pray and brew ale. You grab your tools and follow the boy across the misty fields, your boots sucking through the morning mud. The abbey rises slowly from the grey like a dream, its stone walls slick with dew, its silence pressing. You're escorted to a wooden door behind the library, where a lock dangles broken, the metal twisted like a pretzel. Someone's forced it. You glance at the monk beside you, who's deliberately not meeting your eye. You don't ask questions. Your job is to fix, but you notice scrape marks near the hinges and a faint, muddy footprint on the stone floor. You tuck that away in your mind. The new lock you install is one of your better designs, a double latch model with a hidden spring catch. You finish as the bells chime prime and the monks shuffle by with sleepy devotion. The one who summoned you offers bread and a bit of salted fish, and you eat in silence, eyeing the locked door you've just secured. Monks hide all sorts of things: manuscripts, relics, secrets. But again, you're just the smith. You return to your forge with fish breath and too many questions. Mid-morning brings a rush of villagers. A cartwheel shattered near the bridge, 2 spokes split clean in half. You inspect the iron bands, note the uneven stress patterns, and sigh. Another wheel made by that half-blind carpenter 2 villages over. You heat the iron hoops, hammer them back into a true circle, and supervise the wheel's reconstruction. Your apprentice fetches nails and tries not to drop them all at once. Cartwheels are simple, but essential. Without them, trade stops. Pilgrims don't arrive. Ale doesn't get delivered. You're not just banging on metal, you're keeping the arteries of the village flowing. After lunch, a farmer brings in a bent scythe. He claims a spirit cursed it. You bite your tongue, examine the blade, and find the tang warped from improper use. Nothing supernatural, just bad technique and maybe a rock hidden in the barley. Still, the farmer insists you bless it. You mumble something in Latin, throw a handful of water on it, and he nods reverently. He'll probably tell everyone it was divine intervention. You let him believe it. It's not your job to argue theology. It's your job to fix what's broken, even if it means playing priest once in a while. That afternoon, you begin a more delicate project, reforging a broken dagger that belonged to a retired soldier. The blade was snapped at the hilt, likely from a fight the man no longer brags about. You reforge it using a lap welding technique passed down through 5 generations. As you heat the steel, press the ends together, and hammer like the entire past century depends on your accuracy, you think about legacy. Not the grand kind with statues and songs, but the kind whispered in the way a blade sits in its sheath, the way a lock clicks shut, the way a door creaks open at midnight. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were truly considered craftsmen or just glorified laborers. You're not sure it matters. The world breaks, and you fix it. That's a kind of power, even if no one calls it noble. Evening approaches, and with it, the town's brewer, a wiry man with soot-stained hands of his own, though his come from burning barley, not iron. He needs a copper kettle lid reshaped. It's warped from pressure and heat. You set to work, smiling slightly. Copper is a pleasure after iron. It bends easily, sings under the hammer instead of screaming. The lid takes shape quickly, and the brewer offers you a tankard of his newest batch. It's bitter, sharp, and makes your tongue curl. An acquired taste, he grins. You tell him it's terrible. He laughs like you complimented his mother. As the sun begins to dip behind the hills, you inspect your tools. One of your tongs is cracking at the hinge. You make a mental note to replace it tomorrow. You won't. You'll forget, like always, until it snaps mid-use, and you curse like a sailor and blame your apprentice. Speaking of, the boy's working late, trying to reforge a hinge by himself. You watch him for a moment, arms crossed, pretending not to see him using the wrong angle. Then you call out, "It's not a wishbone. You have to coax it." He starts over. Better. One day he'll make a hinge that doesn't squeak like a dying goose. Just not yet. The night brings one last visitor. A midwife, older than most trees, clutching a broken birthing stool. One of its metal braces cracked during a delivery. You don't ask for details. She's tired, you're tired, and the stool is just another symbol of the quiet work that holds lives together. You fix it with 3 rivets and a quiet prayer to gods you're not sure you believe in. She thanks you with a kiss on the cheek and a small pouch of herbs for your joints. You accept both gratefully. By candlelight, you scribble a few notes in your ledger, not for taxes or records, but to remind yourself of the odd things you've seen: metal birds, broken relics, blessed scythes. Your handwriting is terrible, your ink smudges, and you spell scythe wrong twice. Still, the page feels like something permanent. You lie in bed later, muscles humming like distant anvils, and think about how many things today needed you. Not wanted, needed. That's the strange thing about your life. It's full of people who don't understand what you do, but who absolutely cannot function without it. You are the invisible skeleton of the village, the keeper of hinges and horseshoes, of armor and ale kettles. You don't sleep well, not because of dreams, but because the fire in your head never really cools. It's always forging, always shaping. And in those restless moments, you wonder if someone, centuries from now, will find one of your nails or blades buried beneath a collapsed house and say, "Ah, a blacksmith made this." Not your name, just your work. And somehow, that's enough. Your eyes open to the hiss of rain on the forge roof, the kind of cold drizzle that soaks your bones before you realize it's started. You pull on your damp tunic and step into the grey world, where even the chickens look offended by the weather. You light the fire with stiff fingers, coaxing the coals to life with bellows that wheeze louder than your old aunt. Smoke curls like a serpent around your face, and you cough into your elbow. Today's first task waits in the form of a knight's messenger bearing a bent spur and a sour attitude. The spur's twisted, like it tried to escape the horse's heel. You take it in silence, nod, and begin reshaping it over the anvil. Knights expect their gear to be perfect, shiny, symmetrical, sacred. But you know the truth. Underneath all that pomp and polish, their tools are as flawed as anyone else's. You flatten the iron, round the edges, and polish it just enough to reflect a cloudy version of your face. The messenger grunts thanks and tosses you a silver coin that lands in a puddle. You let it stay there until he's gone. Silver isn't afraid of mud. Mid-morning brings a different challenge, a local scribe with a warped stylus. "It's sentimental," he mutters. "Was my father's." You smile, not because of the sentiment, but because he's asked you to fix a writing tool with the same reverence someone else might give a sword. The stylus is delicate. Too much heat and it'll melt. Too little and it won't bend. You heat it slowly, then ease it back into true with small, careful taps. As it cools, the scribe tells you about a manuscript he's working on, something about saints and dreams. You nod politely, while wondering how many saints ever had to mend their own hinges. Historians still argue whether tradespeople like you were literate or not, but the truth is less interesting than the assumption. You know your letters, just not their fancy ones. And no, you're not writing epic poems about the iron hinge that refused to align, but you do keep a list of every customer who tries to pay you with dried mushrooms or promises of future favor. Spoiler: future favor never heats the forge. Around midday, your apprentice returns with a broken latch he claims just exploded. You raise an eyebrow and he shrinks. You examine the latch. It's fine work once, but it's cracked along a stress line. Likely faulty metal, too much tension. Not sabotage, not magic, just bad luck and physics. You show him where the flaw started, and he nods like he understands. Though you know he doesn't. He will someday, after 20 more broken latches. The afternoon drags like a mule in mud. The weather doesn't let up. Everything you touch feels damp. You begin a batch of nails, just to stay busy. There's never enough nails. Houses need them, carts need them, coffins need them. You hammer out 20, then 30, then 60, before your arm begins to throb. Each one is a tiny promise of structure in a world that keeps trying to collapse. There's a kind of meditative rhythm to it. Heat, draw, cut, cool, repeat. Like breathing, but noisier. A farmer drops off a sickle with a handle that's seen better centuries. You tell him to talk to the carpenter about a new one, but he insists you just add some metal to it. You sigh. You're not a miracle worker. You're not even sure you're a smith some days. You mend it as best you can, knowing it'll break again by harvest. But he leaves happy, and that's enough, for now. Evening approaches with a surprise, a travelling performer limping into your yard with a bent juggling knife, and a dramatic story about bandits and bravery. He's clearly lying, but the knife is real, and the bend is clean. You admire the curve for a second. It's graceful, almost artistic. Then you fix it, fast, before the rain kills your fire. The performer tries to pay you with a riddle. You stare at him until he finds a coin. As he leaves, he tosses the knife into the air and catches it behind his back. Show off. But in a village where most people only know one way to swing a tool, it's refreshing. You clean the forge one-handed while nursing a sore wrist. Your body is a map of tiny betrayals. A tendon that aches when it rains. A knee that clicks every third step. A shoulder that pops when you reach too high. You once thought you'd age into respect. Instead, you've aged into invisibility. People see your work, not you. The hinge swings, the gate holds, the cart rolls. No one stops to admire the joint. That's okay. Joints weren't made to be admired. They were made to hold. You share a late supper with your apprentice, both of you too tired to talk. The stew is thin, the bread tougher than anything you've forged all week. But it's warm, and the quiet between spoonfuls feels like kindness. He finally asks about the old hammer mounted above the door, the one no one's allowed to touch. You tell him it belonged to your master, and his master before him. You've never used it. Not once. Some tools are too heavy with ghosts. He nods, unsure what to say. And you're glad. Some stories aren't meant for the young. You finish the night by oiling your tools, each one familiar as a scar. Tongs, hammers, chisels, punches. You know their shapes in the dark, their voices, when they hit metal. You dream in iron, even when you sleep in straw. The wind howls outside, whistling through the gaps in your shutters. You think of the people sleeping soundly tonight because you fixed their gates, their knives, their doors. They don't know your name, they never will. But they know safety, warmth, and function. That's your legacy. Not fame, not fortune, just usefulness. And in a world where everything falls apart eventually, being the one who holds it together, even temporarily, is a kind of quiet glory. You trudge through the shadowed alleys of medieval villages, the faint glow of torchlight flickering on the rough timber walls around you, and the air thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and something less easy to place. Perhaps the lingering stench of iron and burning coal from the blacksmith's forge down the lane. As you approach, you hear the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil, a relentless metallic beat that punctuates the otherwise eerie silence of the night. Blacksmiths were the backbone of medieval communities, indispensable, yet underappreciated. Craftsmen whose grueling labour shaped the tools, weapons, and even the very fate of the people around them. But here's the reality check. Being a medieval blacksmith wasn't just tough work. It was a downright hazardous lifestyle that tested both body and spirit in ways you probably wouldn't survive today. Imagine breathing in clouds of toxic fumes every day, working with molten metal that could burn your skin instantly, and enduring backbreaking hours while knowing that one slip could mean serious injury or even death. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to see where in the world you're tuning in from as we wander deeper into this gritty, smoky, yet oddly fascinating world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the forge, watching as the blacksmith pulls a glowing rod of iron from the fire, sparks flying like tiny stars against the dark. His muscular arms ripple with effort, sweat dripping down his face, smudged with soot. The blacksmith's trade was a paradox of power and vulnerability. He wielded heat and metal to create swords that could win battles, horseshoes that ensured safe travel, and household tools vital for survival. But his own safety was constantly at risk. The working environment was brutal. The forge was a furnace of oppressive heat, the air heavy with smoke and particulates that clogged lungs over time. Historians still argue whether the life expectancy of blacksmiths was significantly lower than average due to occupational hazards. But what's certain is that many suffered chronic respiratory issues, burns, and accidents from handling heavy and dangerous materials. And that's only the start of the story. Your senses are overwhelmed by the symphony of sounds, the clang of hammer on anvil, the hiss of water cooling red-hot metal, and the occasional grunt of exertion. This was not just a job, but a demanding art that required skill, precision, and an almost mystical understanding of materials and fire. Medieval blacksmiths were some of the most highly respected artisans, yet they often lived on the edge of poverty and health risks. While their work was crucial for farming, warfare, and daily life, blacksmiths were paradoxically seen as both vital and slightly dangerous, partly because of the mysterious nature of their craft. Fire, metal, and smoke were elements tied to old beliefs about magic and alchemy. Some folk thought blacksmiths could ward off evil spirits simply by the power of their forge and the tools they made. What might surprise you is that blacksmithing wasn't just about brute strength. It required deep knowledge of metallurgy, timing, and technique. For instance, the process of tempering steel, a crucial step to make it tough yet flexible, involved heating the metal to precise temperatures and then cooling it rapidly. Get this wrong, and the blade would shatter or bend uselessly. But tempering was a black art of sorts, guarded knowledge passed down through apprenticeships. Scholars still debate the extent to which medieval blacksmiths understood the chemical and physical transformations happening in their forge versus relying on tradition and trial and error. Regardless, their work directly influenced historical outcomes. Superior weapons could tip the scales in battles, and a reliable horseshoe could mean life or death on a journey. Your feet crunch over a scattering of discarded metal scraps and slag, remnants of failed attempts, and the blacksmith's relentless pursuit of perfection. The forge's glow casts flickering shadows on these fragments, each one a silent testament to countless hours of effort. You notice a small leather pouch tied to the blacksmith's belt. It contains a strange mix of herbs and animal fats. It's in our medieval hand cream to protect his hands from the relentless heat and abrasions. It sounds like a joke, but it worked to some degree. Caring for one's skin was essential, and blacksmiths had their own remedies for burns, cuts, and blisters, which were frequent companions in their daily toil. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit here. Medieval blacksmiths sometimes used crocodile dung as a topical treatment for wounds and burns, believing it had healing properties. While this sounds more like a gag from a bizarre medieval sitcom, it's true. Such remedies reflected the medical understanding of the times. Rough, experimental, and often downright strange by today's standards. You probably wouldn't want to try that tonight, but hey, it shows how resourceful and desperate people were in an era before antibiotics and modern medicine. And speaking of strange, historians still argue whether some of these remedies actually helped or made things worse. Some scholars suggest that the heat from the forge might have acted as a sort of sterilizer, reducing infection risk more than these odd treatments. Meanwhile, the blacksmith's social life was another complicated matter. Despite the importance of their craft, many blacksmiths lived somewhat isolated lives. The forge was a workplace, a workshop, and a living space rolled into one, often located on the outskirts of the village due to the smoke and fire hazards. Noise and odor made the forge an unwelcome neighbor in more crowded medieval towns. Plus, the demanding nature of the job left little time or energy for socializing. Still, blacksmiths often held a respected place in the community, sometimes serving as informal local experts on repairs and metal work. But you'd be surprised to know that blacksmiths could also be feared or mistrusted, partly due to their connection to fire and metal, which in folklore could symbolize both creation and destruction. And here's another reality check. Being A blacksmith was not only physically demanding, but also economically precarious. Raw materials like iron and coal had to be sourced and paid for upfront, often on credit, and market fluctuations could quickly ruin a smith's business. Demand could be seasonal, with farming cycles and military campaigns affecting how many tools or weapons were needed. Some blacksmiths supplemented their income by making nails or household items, but this was less profitable. You might think this steady work meant steady pay, but historians still argue about the real income and economic status of medieval blacksmiths. Some records show wealth and property ownership, while others depict lives of hardship and struggle. As you watch the blacksmith pause to wipe his brow and take a sip of water, you notice the fine detail of his work, each stroke purposeful, each piece of metal shaped with care. It's a craft that blends artistry with brute force, precision with sweat, and behind every horseshoe, sword, or plowshare lies a story of human resilience and ingenuity in an era often dismissed as dark and backward. You probably wouldn't want to live it, but it's fascinating to glimpse the day-to-day reality of those who kept medieval society running through fire and hammer. Finally, remember the whispering debates among historians about whether the introduction of the blast furnace in the late medieval period revolutionized blacksmithing as much as we think, or if traditional smithing methods persisted far longer in many regions. That question still invites heated discussions, much like the very forges we're peering into tonight. So, as the sparks fade and the night deepens, take a moment to appreciate the complex, smoky world of medieval blacksmiths. A world where survival, skill, and a bit of superstition dance together in the glow of the forge. You step away from the smoky forge, the lingering scent of burnt coal clinging to your clothes, and walk toward the village square where the local marketplace buzzes with life despite the late hour. It's here, amid the haggling merchants, clucking, chickens, and dusty piles of produce, that you begin to see how deeply the blacksmith's work threads into everyday medieval life. Every plowshare used by a farmer, every horseshoe nailed to a horse's hoof, every knife in a cook's kitchen, all were born in that fiery crucible of sweat and iron. Yet despite their indispensable role, blacksmiths' lives were marked by paradoxes of reverence and hardship. You probably wouldn't want to trade places with one, but understanding their world reveals so much about the medieval social fabric you navigate tonight. So, before you settle in, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this slow journey through history, and please share your location and local time down below. Now dim those lights, maybe turn on that fan again, and let's continue walking together into the past. As you weave through the crowd, you notice how the blacksmith's influence stretches far beyond the forge itself. The tools he crafted were fundamental to agriculture, which, let's face it, was the medieval economy's beating heart. Without sturdy plows, harvests would fail. Without sharp sickles, crops couldn't be cut efficiently. And without nails, homes and carts wouldn't hold together. The blacksmith's work was literally the framework on which medieval life was built. Yet, ironically, most blacksmiths worked in relative poverty compared to the landed gentry, or even some successful merchants. The trade required heavy investment in fuel and materials, plus apprenticeships that could last years, and yet it offered uncertain financial rewards. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths occupied a stable middle-class position or were more often struggling artisans surviving on the edge. You pause to listen to a lively debate between two merchants, one arguing that blacksmithing was an art form requiring genius-level skills, the other insisting it was just hammering metal. Both have points. The precision required to temper steel correctly, or to forge a sword that wouldn't snap in battle, definitely elevates the blacksmith's craft beyond mere labor. Yet, the physical exertion and long hours of pounding hot metal demand stamina and toughness that few modern jobs match. It's a blend of brain and brawn, tradition and innovation, and somehow that mix kept the blacksmith's forge burning bright through centuries of change. Now, picture this. A typical medieval blacksmith's workshop was no quiet studio, but a chaotic, noisy environment where molten metal hissed as it met water, and the clang of hammering echoed off stone walls. Sparks flew like tiny fireworks, and the heat was so intense that even standing nearby could feel oppressive. The blacksmith's tools were simple but essential. Hammers of various sizes, tongs to grip the hot iron, anvils shaped to guide the metal, and bellows to stoke the fire's flames. Mastery of these tools and techniques was often gained through years of apprenticeship, sometimes starting as young as 10 years old. And the learning curve was steep. One wrong move could ruin a piece or cause serious injury, a quirky detail that often surprises people. Blacksmiths sometimes used urine in their craft. Yes, urine. It was collected because of its ammonia content, which helped clean metal surfaces and even played a role in the tempering process. While this sounds gross today, it was a practical, readily available chemical resource in a time before industrial cleaners or chemicals. This peculiar fact often earns a grimace or chuckle from listeners, but it's a testament to medieval ingenuity in using whatever was at hand. Historians still debate the extent to which such methods were widespread versus localized traditions, but there's no denying that medieval blacksmiths were resourceful and inventive. Your eyes scan the market stalls where merchants sell their wares, pots, fabrics, spices, and of course metal goods ranging from horseshoes to cooking utensils. The blacksmith's products, though often taken for granted, formed a crucial link in this economic chain. Without them, much of the medieval lifestyle would collapse. It's a reminder that history isn't just about kings and battles, but the everyday work that built society from the ground up. As the evening wears on, you consider the social status of blacksmiths. Despite their importance, many lived modestly, sometimes on the village outskirts, to keep the forge's smoke and noise away from homes. This isolation could foster a sense of mystery or superstition. In some places, blacksmiths were believed to possess magical powers, partly because they controlled fire and shaped metal, elements connected to folklore and superstition. Some villagers thought blacksmiths could ward off evil or curses, while others were wary of their abilities. The blacksmith's place in the community was complex, both respected and a little feared. Economically, blacksmiths faced unpredictable markets. Wars could drive up demand for weapons, while peaceful times shifted focus to farming tools or household items. The prices of iron and charcoal fluctuated, impacting the cost of production and profits. Sometimes, blacksmiths took on extra work, like making nails or repairing tools, just to keep the business afloat. Apprenticeships were expensive, and many young blacksmiths struggled to establish their own workshops. It's a testament to their resilience that the craft survived and evolved over centuries. Here's a historical fact for you. The rise of guilds in medieval Europe dramatically changed the blacksmith's world. Guilds were organizations that regulated trades, maintained quality standards, and protected members' interests. Joining a blacksmith guild often required years of apprenticeship and mastery of the craft. Guilds controlled who could sell blacksmith goods, setting prices, and limiting competition. This system brought some stability, but also restrictions, making it harder for independent smiths to break in. Historians still debate how much guilds helped versus hindered innovation and economic mobility. You notice the blacksmith's apprentice working nearby, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggles to control a piece of glowing iron. Apprenticeship was a grueling process, often unpaid or poorly paid labor, with long hours and harsh discipline. Yet, it was the only path to mastery, and for many young men, a blacksmith's trade offered a chance at a stable, respected career. Families often saw apprenticeship as a way to ensure their children's future, despite the hardships involved. Among the tools and techniques, the creation of armor stands out as one of the blacksmith's most demanding tasks. Armor had to be strong enough to protect in battle, but light enough to allow movement. Crafting a full suit of plate armor was an enormous undertaking, requiring advanced skills and careful planning. Blacksmiths and armorers were distinct but related professions, sometimes overlapping in skills. The armor's design varied by region and era, reflecting evolving warfare tactics. Historians still argue whether armor was more of a status symbol or genuinely effective protection in combat. You might imagine the life of a medieval blacksmith as monotonous, but it was actually full of unexpected challenges and moments of creativity. Every piece of metal was a puzzle, shaped by heat, hammer, and skill into something useful or beautiful. The forge was a place of transformation, where raw materials became tools, weapons, and art. This blend of utility and artistry is part of why blacksmithing has fascinated people for centuries. As night deepens, you feel the weight of history pressing in. The blacksmith's story is one of grit, danger, and quiet innovation. You probably won't want to live it, but understanding it brings the medieval world to life in vivid detail. The clang of hammer on anvil is not just noise, it's the heartbeat of a society built on fire and iron. You step back into the blacksmith's workshop as dawn's pale light filters through the soot-streaked windows, casting long shadows across the anvil and scattered tools. The air is thick with the scent of burnt coal and sweat, a reminder that this place has never truly slept. As you settle into the rhythm of this early morning scene, imagine the blacksmith beginning his day before most villagers stir, stoking the fire and preparing his workspace. This quiet solitude is a brief respite before the day's relentless pounding and hammering begins. You probably won't survive the endless hours of labor, but you'll at least get a front row seat to what it really meant to be a medieval blacksmith. So, if you haven't already, take a moment to like and subscribe if this journey intrigues you, and don't forget to share your local time and where you're watching from. Now, dim your lights, breathe in that soft background hum of your fan, and let's slip deeper into the medieval forge together. As the blacksmith rekindles the forge's flames, you notice the subtle but vital differences between forging iron and steel. Iron, plentiful and relatively soft, was often the material of choice for everyday tools, nails, and horseshoes. Steel, on the other hand, required a more complex process, combining iron with carbon to produce a stronger, more durable metal. The secret to great steel was in the heat and timing. Too hot, and it would lose strength. Too cool, and it would be brittle. The blacksmith's knowledge of metallurgy was empirical, built on generations of trial and error rather than formal science. Historians still debate exactly how much medieval smiths understood about the chemical processes at work, but their practical mastery was undeniable. One quirky fact that might catch you off guard: medieval blacksmiths sometimes used what we'd now call secret recipes for their steel, including adding bits of bone, horn, or even glass to the forge. These additives were believed to influence the metal's properties, though exactly how and why remains a subject of scholarly debate. This mix of practical know-how and superstition was typical in medieval craft. Blurring the line between science and magic, you can almost picture the blacksmith muttering to himself as he tosses strange ingredients into the fire, hoping for the perfect blade. The blacksmith's workday was punctuated by a series of carefully timed steps, each demanding precision and speed. First came the heating. Red-hot iron glowed fiercely in the forge, its surface bubbling with molten scale. Then the hammering. Blows struck with rhythmic force, shaping the metal on the anvil's hardy edge. The cooling, plunging the heated piece into water or oil, a process called quenching, which hardened the steel. Too fast, and the metal could crack. Too slow, and it would remain soft. Tempering followed, reheating the metal to a moderate temperature to reduce brittleness. The entire process required keen senses and muscle memory. One wrong move, and hours of work could be ruined. It wasn't just the technique that made blacksmithing challenging. The physical toll was enormous. The blacksmith's arms and back bore the strain of lifting heavy hammers and wielding them with controlled fury. The heat was relentless, especially in summer, and the smoke and dust could cause respiratory problems. Despite the danger and discomfort, blacksmiths rarely had the luxury to rest. They were often the village's indispensable toolmakers, expected to repair carts, shoe horses, mend household items, and sometimes fashion weapons on demand. Their workload fluctuated with seasons and events, but the pressure to produce quality work never eased. Here's a historical fact. During medieval times, blacksmiths were often also responsible for making and maintaining weaponry, including swords, arrowheads, and armor. Their skill could literally tip the balance in warfare. High-quality swords were prized possessions, symbols of status and power, often passed down through generations. The production of weapons required even greater expertise, as any flaw could be fatal in battle. Historians still argue how widespread professional weaponsmithing was, with some evidence suggesting that specialized armorers operated separately from everyday blacksmiths. One surprising tidbit: in some medieval towns, blacksmiths formed the backbone of early fire brigades. Their knowledge of metal and heat made them uniquely suited to crafting firefighting tools like hooks, ladders, and pumps. It's an ironic twist that those who worked with fire also helped fight destructive blazes, a testament to the multifaceted roles blacksmiths played in their communities. This overlap of duties is a reminder that medieval professions were rarely rigid but often blended based on local needs. Socially, the blacksmith's status was ambiguous. While essential, many were considered common laborers rather than elite craftsmen. Their work was gritty and hands-on, far removed from the scholarly pursuits of monks or the aristocratic leisure of nobles. Yet their expertise earned them respect, and some successful smiths amassed enough wealth to elevate their standing. Guilds, when present, helped consolidate this respect by enforcing quality standards and training new generations. These guilds also played a political role, influencing local governance and protecting members' interests. You might find it interesting that blacksmiths often developed strong community ties through apprenticeships and family businesses. Many workshops were multi-generational, with sons and daughters learning the craft alongside their parents. This continuity helped preserve techniques and innovations, creating a lineage of metalworking knowledge. Still, the job was physically demanding, and not everyone survived the rigors of a lifetime at the anvil. Occupational hazards included burns, cuts, and chronic respiratory issues, but the blacksmith's trade endured despite these risks. As you imagine the day winding down, think of the blacksmith inspecting his finished work. Perhaps a finely balanced sword, a sturdy horseshoe, or a delicate set of hinges. Each item carried the imprint of countless hammer strikes, a silent testament to skill and perseverance. The blacksmith's forge was more than a workshop. It was a crucible of medieval life, shaping tools, weapons, and even destinies. You probably won't want to step into those heavy boots, but appreciating their world brings you a little closer to the heartbeat of history. The morning mist still clings to the village as you follow the blacksmith into the realm of his lesser-known but equally vital work, repairing and creating household items that keep medieval life functioning. Unlike the dramatic clang of sword-making or horseshoeing, much of this work is quieter, more repetitive, but no less important. Imagine yourself standing amidst a cluttered workshop filled with a jumble of nails, hinges, locks, and simple tools, all in various states of repair or construction. This is where the everyday magic of the medieval blacksmith really unfolds. The soft scratching of metal on metal, the occasional ring of a tiny hammer. These sounds are the soundtrack to countless homes, farms, and shops that rely on the blacksmith's steady hands. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your location and local time below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on that gentle fan hum, and let's ease deeper into the world of medieval craftsmanship. The range of household items the blacksmith handled was staggering. Nails, for instance, were indispensable. Every wooden structure depended on them, from modest huts to grand halls. Each nail was forged individually by hand, heated, shaped, and cooled in a painstaking process that would test your patience today. The blacksmith's nails varied in size and shape depending on the task. Some were tiny and delicate for furniture, others large and sturdy for beams. Without mass production, nails were valuable commodities, and their scarcity often slowed construction projects. This reality makes you appreciate modern convenience more than ever. Among the more specialized tasks was making hinges and latches, doors, chests, gates. All needed secure, functional hardware. which only a skilled blacksmith could provide. These items required not just strength, but subtle craftsmanship, balancing durability with smooth operation. Hinges had to bear weight and resist rust, latches needed to lock reliably, and locks themselves were intricate puzzles of tumblers and wards. Historians still argue about how advanced medieval locksmithing really was, but surviving examples show a surprising level of complexity and ingenuity. One quirky detail about medieval locks is that many were actually designed more to keep honest people honest rather than to stop determined thieves. The craftsmanship often prioritized deterrence through noise or delay over outright security. Imagine a lock that creaks and clangs loudly when tampered with, a medieval alarm system of sorts. Some blacksmiths became known locally for their inventive, noise-making locks, which might not stop a burglar but would surely wake up the household. It's a reminder that medieval security was as much about social deterrence as physical barriers. The blacksmith's work extended even to the kitchen. Pots, pans, spits, and fire grates all required metalwork, and the forge was central to maintaining the hearth's efficiency. You can almost feel the warmth radiating from the blacksmith's handiwork as you picture a sizzling spit turning slowly over the fire, held firmly by iron supports shaped by the smith's hammer. Cooking was a labor-intensive affair, and reliable equipment was essential to avoid disaster or wasted food. The blacksmith's role in this was often overlooked, but without him, medieval kitchens would have been far less functional. Socially, blacksmiths were woven into the fabric of daily life beyond mere utility. They were often community hubs. Villagers might gather at the forge to swap news while waiting for a horseshoe or tool. The smith's workshop was a place of exchange, not just of goods, but of stories and local gossip. This social role gave blacksmiths a subtle power, a position of influence that extended beyond their physical labor. They knew everyone's business and were often called upon to mediate disputes or serve as informal judges in minor conflicts. Here's a fact that might surprise you. Despite their indispensable role, blacksmiths sometimes faced suspicion or fear. Their mastery of fire and metal led to rumors of sorcery or dealings with dark forces. In some regions, blacksmiths were thought to possess magical powers, which could be both a blessing and a curse. This folklore dimension added a layer of mystery to the smith's otherwise practical vocation, making them figures of both respect and caution. Historians still argue about how deeply these beliefs affected the blacksmith's daily life and status. The physical environment of the blacksmith's workshop also deserves mention. These spaces were often cramped, dimly lit, and hot beyond comfort. Ventilation was minimal, and the constant presence of smoke and dust made breathing a challenge. You can imagine the toll this took on health over the years. Lung diseases and eye problems were common among smiths. Yet the workshop was also a place of creation and transformation, where raw materials were forged into objects that shaped medieval existence. Apprenticeship was the pathway into this demanding profession. Young boys, and occasionally girls, started early, learning by observation and gradually taking on more responsibility. The process could take years, with the apprentice living and working under the master smith's roof. This intensive training ensured the survival of craft knowledge and techniques, but also meant the profession was not easily accessible to outsiders. Guilds sometimes regulated entry, protecting standards and controlling competition, but apprenticeships were often informal in rural areas. A lesser-known fact is that blacksmiths occasionally ventured into dentistry. While not the tooth-pulling specialists of later centuries, some smiths crafted rudimentary dental tools and even made early dental prosthetics, like wire braces to hold teeth in place. This crossover between metalwork and healthcare highlights the versatility expected of medieval craftsmen and the blurred boundaries between professions. It also reminds you that in a world without modern medicine, innovation came from unexpected places. As you reflect on all these facets of the blacksmith's work, it becomes clear that their craft was about more than just brute strength and fire. It was a nuanced dance of science, art, and social function. You probably won't want to take up the hammer yourself, but appreciating the blacksmith's complex role deepens your understanding of medieval life's practical realities and human stories. The day drags on, and you find yourself drawn deeper into the world of medieval blacksmithing, this time focusing on the crucial role of the blacksmith in weapon maintenance and repair, a job that was anything but glamorous, yet absolutely vital. Unlike the romantic image of forging shining swords from scratch, much of a blacksmith's time was spent ensuring existing weapons remained battle-ready, dull blades sharpened and bent spears straightened. Picture yourself handling a rusted sword that's seen one too many scraps, the metal pitted and worn, and the hilt barely hanging on. The blacksmith's job was to breathe new life into these battered tools, knowing that a single broken weapon could mean the difference between survival and death on the medieval battlefield. So, before you settle in further, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to share your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim those lights, maybe let that fan keep humming softly, and let's move onward, deeper into the gritty realities of medieval weapon upkeep. Weapons maintenance demanded precision and patience. A dull sword or axe was more dangerous to its wielder than to the enemy, so regular sharpening was mandatory. The blacksmith would carefully grind down the blade, restoring its edge, but without compromising the metal's integrity. Too much grinding, and the blade would weaken and break. Too little, and it wouldn't cut through armor or flesh effectively. Imagine the delicate balance required, working by eye and feel alone, with no modern measuring tools to rely on. Historians still argue how standardized these maintenance techniques were, given the variations in weapon quality and smithing skill across regions. Another essential task was repairing damage caused by battle: bent blades, cracked shafts, broken handles. The blacksmith had to be a metal surgeon, skilled in heating and hammering the steel back into shape. Fixing a bent spear, for example, required heating the metal just enough to regain flexibility, but not so much as to ruin the temper or hardness of the weapon. This tempering process was a closely guarded secret among smiths, passed down through generations as a kind of family magic. You probably won't survive the trial by fire of mastering this, but watching it done must have been mesmerizing. A quirky tidbit about medieval weapons repair involves the blood groove, that long groove running along many sword blades. Contrary to popular myth, this groove wasn't designed to let blood flow out and make the weapon lighter. It actually served to reduce weight while maintaining structural integrity. The blacksmith had to pay special attention to these grooves during repairs, ensuring they didn't become weak points that might snap in combat. Sometimes, these grooves were decorated or inscribed with symbols for good luck or protection, blending function and superstition. Armor maintenance was another major responsibility. Chainmail, for instance, was a nightmare to repair. Each broken link had to be painstakingly replaced by hand. Imagine sitting for hours, threading tiny iron rings through one another, ensuring the weave remained tight enough to stop an arrow but flexible enough to allow movement. Plate armor repairs were different but equally demanding, requiring reshaping and retempering dented or cracked plates. Blacksmiths often worked closely with armorers, specialists who focused solely on personal protection gear. Historians still debate the exact division of labor between smiths and armorers, but it's clear the two crafts were intertwined. You might be amused to learn that some blacksmiths were also unofficial battlefield surgeons, tasked with quickly patching damaged weapons during or immediately after combat, often under terrifying conditions. These emergency repairs were crude but life-saving, performed with limited tools and time, sometimes even with the enemy nearby. The ability to improvise and work under pressure was as important as technical skill. This raw, urgent aspect of the blacksmith's role is rarely captured in romanticized medieval stories. One unexpected role of blacksmiths was crafting and maintaining crossbow bolts and arrowheads. These small, sharp objects required precise shaping to ensure flight accuracy and penetration power. Arrowheads came in various types: broadheads for slicing, bodkin points for piercing armor, and barbed tips for hunting. The blacksmith had to know the needs of each type and tailor the design accordingly. Historians still argue about how standardized these designs were, with evidence suggesting a surprising degree of local variation and customization. Socially, The blacksmith's role in weapon upkeep reinforced their ties to local militias and knights, positioning them as indispensable partners in warfare. The smith's forge was not just a workshop, but a strategic asset, a place where the community's defenses were sustained and strengthened. Blacksmiths could wield considerable influence, as their skills were critical to the survival of their neighbors during turbulent times. Some smiths even developed reputations as master swordsmiths and were sought after by noble patrons, gaining status and wealth unusual for craftsmen. The physical toll of constant hammering and heat was severe, and injuries were common. Blisters, burns, and cuts were everyday hazards. But more insidious was the risk of long-term damage from repetitive strain and exposure to metal dust and fumes. Despite these dangers, the blacksmith's work was often seen as honorable and vital, contrasting with other professions considered less prestigious or even dirty. This perception helped blacksmiths maintain a unique place in the medieval social hierarchy. A quirky but true fact: blacksmiths sometimes used their knowledge of metalworking to craft musical instruments, including bells and simple string instrument parts. This crossover between practical and artistic metalwork reveals a surprising versatility. The same hands that forged weapons might also create objects that brought beauty and joy, illustrating the multifaceted nature of medieval craftsmanship as you picture all these details: the sparks flying, the ringing hammer, the sweat and grime. You begin to understand that the medieval blacksmith was much more than a simple laborer. They were artisans, engineers, healers, and social hubs rolled into one. You probably won't want to stand at the anvil yourself anytime soon, but knowing the complexity and importance of their work adds a new layer of respect for these unsung heroes of the Middle Ages. You move onward in this quiet journey through the medieval blacksmith's world, now stepping into the realm of tools and everyday objects, the less glamorous but utterly necessary items that kept medieval life ticking. Forget swords and armor for a moment. Think instead of the humble horseshoe, the farming plough, cooking pots, nails, hinges, locks. These were all forged by the blacksmith's skilled hands, the silent backbone of rural and urban medieval economies. As you imagine the clang of metal shaping the tools that kept crops growing and homes functioning, remember that these ordinary objects were often the difference between survival and starvation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights again, let that soft fan hum on, and let your mind wander gently deeper into the medieval forge. The horseshoe, for instance, was a small but revolutionary invention that dramatically improved medieval life. Before horseshoes became common, horses' hooves wore down quickly on rough terrain, limiting their use for travel and farming. A well-fitted horseshoe, nailed securely by the blacksmith, protected the hooves and allowed horses to work harder and longer. This not only boosted agricultural productivity, but also improved transport and communication. Blacksmiths who mastered horseshoeing, farriers, were highly valued, and their trade developed alongside general smithing. Historians still debate the exact origins and spread of horseshoeing technology, but its impact is undeniable. Another everyday object was the plowshare, the sharp blade of the plow that cut into soil. This piece had to be strong enough to break tough ground, but flexible enough to avoid breaking under stress. The blacksmith's ability to produce durable, well-shaped plowshares could mean the difference between a good harvest and crop failure. Imagine the meticulous care and skill required to produce these farming essentials, balancing metal hardness with flexibility, skills that were often learned through apprenticeship and passed down within families. Beyond farming tools, blacksmiths also produced a variety of household necessities: nails for construction, hinges for doors, locks and keys for security, cooking utensils like pots and pans, and even simple furniture fittings. All these items required different techniques and tools, showcasing the blacksmith's adaptability. Nail making, for example, involved shaping tiny pieces of iron with precision, a repetitive task demanding steady hands and patience. Locks and keys, meanwhile, involved early mechanical knowledge, and some blacksmiths specialized in these more intricate creations. An interesting side note is the role blacksmiths played in town defense beyond weapons. They forged nails and fittings for building sturdy gates and reinforced doors, essential in times of conflict or threat. The blacksmiths' work literally helped keep the enemy out, even when they weren't forging swords. Medieval towns often depended on their smiths not only for offense, but for fortification, highlighting the breadth of their importance. Medieval blacksmiths' work also extended to making tools for other crafts and trades. Cobblers needed awls and hammers. Carpenters required chisels and axes, and masons depended on trowels and picks. This interconnectedness meant that blacksmiths formed a hub within medieval guild and trade networks. Their skills supported the entire economic ecosystem, and some smithies even evolved into workshops employing several craftsmen. You might be amused to hear that blacksmiths sometimes doubled as village dentists or healers, using their tools in a pinch for tooth extractions or minor surgeries. This odd overlap of metalworking and medicine reflects the blacksmith's role as a community fixer, able to apply their practical skills in unexpected ways. While far from professional medical practitioners, their reputation for toughness and steady hands made them the go-to in emergencies. A quirky fact about medieval blacksmith shops: they were often social gathering spots where locals exchanged news, gossip, and rumors, all while listening to the rhythmic hammering that punctuated daily life. This atmosphere made the smithy a cultural as well as economic center, reinforcing the blacksmith's standing beyond mere craftsmanship. Sometimes smiths were storytellers, sharing tales of local legends or distant battles, their forge glowing as the perfect backdrop for captivating narratives. Historians still argue the extent to which blacksmith guilds controlled access to the craft, influencing training, production quality, and prices. Some evidence suggests that guilds maintained strict regulations, while other accounts point to more informal or family-based apprenticeship systems, especially in rural areas. This ongoing debate underscores the complex social dynamics surrounding blacksmithing as both an art and a livelihood. The physical demands of forging all these everyday tools were immense. Blacksmiths stood for hours near roaring fires, swinging heavy hammers, bending and twisting red-hot metal, all while breathing in smoke and metal dust. The heat, noise, and hard labor took a toll on their bodies, often shortening their working years. Despite this, many blacksmiths continued their craft well into old age, their knowledge and experience compensating for waning physical strength. A surprising twist is how some blacksmiths combined their metalwork with early chemistry, experimenting with alloys like brass or bronze to improve the durability and appearance of their products. These innovations sometimes came from accidental discoveries, like mixing metals found near their forges. Such experimentation was not only practical, but also a form of proto-science, reflecting medieval craftsmen's curiosity and ingenuity. As you picture the myriad objects emerging from the glowing forge, you realize that the blacksmith's work was everywhere in medieval life, silently supporting daily existence. Without these everyday tools and the skilled hands that made them, medieval society would have ground to a halt. So even though you probably won't be rushing out to become a medieval blacksmith yourself, appreciating their quiet but crucial contributions adds a new depth to your understanding of history's everyday heroes. You step deeper into the world of the medieval blacksmith, where the forge's glow no longer just shapes tools, but also shapes communities and culture in subtle ways you might never have considered before. As the hammer clangs rhythmically on heated metal, it's easy to overlook that this sound also echoes through the social fabric of medieval villages and towns, binding people together. The blacksmith's forge was not just a workplace, but often the heart of the community's daily rhythm. You probably won't survive a day in such a smoky, noisy, and scorching environment. But tonight, you get to drift peacefully through the story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share your location and local time below, and let the soft hum of the fan soothe you as you sink deeper into the blacksmith's world. Blacksmiths were often respected members of their communities, wielding not only physical tools but also social influence. Because their skills were so crucial, smiths often acted as informal advisors, mediators, or even informal leaders within villages. Their knowledge of metalworking extended into problem-solving for the community's daily challenges, from fixing broken plows to crafting custom hardware for homes and businesses. This dual role, as craftsman and community pillar, meant the smith's forge was as much a gathering place for ideas and news as it was a workshop. One fascinating tidbit is that blacksmiths were sometimes thought to have a touch of the supernatural about them. The intense fire and transformation of raw iron into useful tools seemed like magic to many. Some cultures even imbued smiths with mystical status, believing they controlled elemental forces of fire and metal. In medieval Europe, for example, blacksmiths were occasionally associated with protective charms or rituals, their tools symbolizing power beyond mere craftsmanship. Historians still debate whether these beliefs genuinely elevated smiths' social status, or if they sometimes isolated them as figures apart from common folk. You might be amused to learn that the blacksmith's forge was often the first place to hear the latest gossip, political rumors, and even scandalous stories. Villagers gathered around, waiting for the smith to finish shaping metal, exchanging whispers while the forge fire flickered. This social dynamic gave the blacksmith influence not just through skill, but through information. Town criers and messengers were not the only conveyors of news. Sometimes, it was the hammer's beat that set the rhythm for the village's conversations. The guild system, which regulated trades like blacksmithing, was an essential factor in medieval urban life. Guilds controlled the quality of goods, the training of apprentices, and even the prices of metalwork. They operated like early trade unions or professional societies, ensuring that smiths maintained high standards and fair competition. However, not all smiths were guild members. Rural smiths often operated independently or within family traditions. This distinction sometimes led to tensions between city guilds and countryside craftsmen, a topic historians still argue over regarding its impact on medieval economies. Blacksmiths also played a role in military campaigns beyond forging weapons. Some were attached to armies as traveling smiths, responsible for repairing armor, weapons, and horseshoes on the battlefield. Their ability to keep equipment battle-ready could turn the tide of skirmishes or prolonged sieges. Imagine the pressure on these smiths working in crude camps, under fire and with limited resources. Their work was as crucial as any soldiers, yet far less celebrated in the history books. Interestingly, blacksmiths were often at the forefront of technological innovation. As warfare evolved, so did the demands on metalwork. Stronger armor, sharper weapons, and more efficient tools required new techniques and alloys. Blacksmiths experimented with tempering and quenching processes to improve metal hardness and flexibility, essentially practicing early forms of materials science. These innovations often spread slowly, with secrecy and competition among smiths shaping the pace of progress. On the more domestic side, blacksmiths influenced fashion and status through the production of decorative metalwork. Ornate hinges, door knockers, jewelry, and belt buckles reflected social standing and personal taste. While not all smiths specialized in such delicate work, some developed reputations for craftsmanship that blended utility and beauty, blurring the lines between artisan and artist. Historians still debate how widespread such decorative metalwork was, and whether it was mainly an urban luxury or accessible to rural elites. The harsh realities of the blacksmith's daily life cannot be overstated. Long hours spent bent over the forge, dealing with burns, eye strain, and heavy lifting, took a physical toll. Despite these challenges, blacksmiths often passed their craft down through generations, with family smithies maintaining their place in the community across centuries. This continuity reinforced not only skills but also traditions, creating a rich cultural heritage tied to metalworking. And here's a quirky fact. In some villages, blacksmiths' workshops were built near water sources, not just for cooling hot metal, but because the sound of flowing water helped mask the loud banging, preventing complaints from neighbors. This practical solution doubled as a calming backdrop, giving the forge a strangely tranquil atmosphere amidst the heat and noise. As you settle into the rhythmic imagery of sparks flying and hammer striking iron, remember that the medieval blacksmith was far more than just a worker of metal. They were innovators, social hubs, and sometimes even mystical figures who shaped the very fabric of medieval life. So, as you drift closer to sleep, carry with you the echo of the forge's steady beat, and the quiet power of those who wielded fire and hammer with equal skill. You move forward in time, still surrounded by the fiery glow of the forge. But now the story shifts to the evolution of blacksmithing tools and techniques in the later medieval period, where innovation began to subtly reshape the blacksmith's world, making their grueling labor slightly more efficient, though not exactly easier. Picture yourself standing beside the smith's anvil as the rhythmic hammer strikes a newly introduced tool, a small invention that would quietly revolutionize how metal was shaped. You probably won't appreciate just how groundbreaking these incremental improvements were, but hey, you get to relax and listen instead of sweating over the hot coals. So, before you sink further into this metal-scented tale, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments, while the soft background hum keeps you calm and cozy. In the late medieval period, blacksmiths began using tools like the treadle hammer and mechanical bellows, which introduced a level of mechanization to the otherwise manual process of forging metal. The treadle hammer, powered by foot, allowed smiths to maintain a steady, powerful hammering rhythm without exhausting their arms completely. Meanwhile, bellows evolved from simple hand pumps to larger, more complex devices that forced air into the forge at higher pressures, raising temperatures and improving the quality of metalwork. These advancements not only enhanced efficiency, but also expanded the range of metals and alloys that could be effectively forged, which had long-term impacts on both civilian and military metal goods. One quirky tidbit is that some smiths experimented with early water-powered hammers. Imagine giant wooden pistons driven by water wheels delivering powerful blows to red-hot iron. This was an early attempt to harness natural energy sources to lighten human labor. Historians still argue whether these water-powered hammers were widespread or remained experimental curiosities limited to specific regions with the right geography. The debate continues because surviving evidence is sparse, but it's clear that the idea was ahead of its time, foreshadowing the Industrial Revolution by centuries. The guilds continued to wield significant influence, tightly regulating who could produce what, where, and how. They protected the secrets of newly developed techniques and fiercely guarded trade knowledge, ensuring that apprenticeships were long and selective. The training often lasted up to 7 years, a serious commitment that ensured only dedicated individuals could join the trade. This exclusivity maintained quality but also limited the spread of innovations. Guildmasters had to balance tradition with progress, a tension that historians still explore regarding its effect on medieval economies. Metalworking techniques became more sophisticated too. The use of different types of iron and steel, such as blister steel and crucible steel, improved the hardness and durability of forged items. The process of carburization, infusing iron with carbon to create steel, was a closely guarded secret in many smithies. Different regions developed their own methods, sometimes influenced by trade with the Islamic world and Asia, where metallurgy was already highly advanced. The transmission of these techniques was gradual and selective, shaped by cultural exchanges and occasional espionage. Blacksmiths also began producing more specialized tools and goods as the needs of society diversified. Agricultural implements like scythes and plows improved in design, enabling farmers to cultivate larger areas with less effort. This slow but steady improvement in farming technology helped support population growth in medieval Europe, creating a feedback loop where more people required more tools, which in turn required more skilled smiths. The industrial and agricultural revolutions of centuries later had their roots in these seemingly small advances. A lesser-known fact is that some blacksmiths began experimenting with decorative ironwork as a form of artistic expression during this period. Wrought iron fences, gates, and even small sculptures appeared in wealthier towns and cities, reflecting the rising wealth of merchant classes and nobility. While practical smithing remained dominant, this blossoming of ornamental metalwork added a new dimension to the craft. Historians still debate how much this decorative work influenced broader art movements of the medieval period, but it certainly elevated the status of skilled smiths in urban environments. The work was still brutal and exhausting, despite these improvements. Smiths faced hazards like inhaling smoke and metal dust, burns from hot iron, and musculoskeletal injuries from repetitive hammering. Many smiths suffered from chronic ailments, and life expectancy in the trade was often lower than average. Some guilds tried to regulate working hours to protect smiths' health, but economic pressures often meant long days with few breaks. This reality makes you appreciate the endurance and toughness these craftsmen displayed. No wonder they sometimes earned reputations as hardened, almost mythical figures in their communities. In military contexts, the late medieval blacksmith's role expanded as well. The growing complexity of armor and weaponry required precise craftsmanship and constant innovation. Plate armor became more common, demanding more exact shaping and joining techniques. Blacksmiths had to be adept not just at forging, but also at fitting and repairing these advanced metalworks. This specialization led to the rise of armorers, distinct from general blacksmiths, who sometimes trained separately and had their own guilds. The overlap between smiths and armorers created interesting professional dynamics, another topic historians still examine closely. Imagine for a moment the daily rhythms of a smith's workshop at this time. Fire crackling, bellows pumping steadily, the hammer's steady beat accompanied by occasional bursts of sparks flying. The smell of hot metal mixed with coal smoke fills the air, while apprentices move carefully around the forge, absorbing skills and traditions. Despite the noise and heat, the forge was also a place of pride, where smiths honed their craft and contributed in tangible ways to their community's survival and prosperity. To close this section, consider the legacy of these medieval blacksmiths. Though their work was often physically punishing and socially demanding, their innovations laid groundwork for modern metallurgy and manufacturing. The subtle changes in tools and techniques they embraced show a craft adapting and evolving, even within the constraints of tradition and guild regulations. Their story is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, wrapped in the warm glow of the forge's fire, which continues to inspire awe today. As you linger in the smoky haze of the forge, the story carries you forward into the twilight of the medieval blacksmith's era, where social changes and economic shifts begin to reshape the craft's very identity, nudging it towards the Renaissance and the early stirrings of industrialization. The blacksmith, once an almost mythical figure commanding immense local respect and power, faces a future where the old ways start to crack under new pressures. You probably won't survive a day in his boots, but you'll get the luxury of hearing how his world started to unravel and transform. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like sharing your location and the time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments as the gentle hum of your fan whispers softly in the background. The late medieval and early Renaissance periods witnessed dramatic shifts in social structure, economics, and technology that directly affected the blacksmith's trade. The gradual rise of cities and the expansion of trade routes brought new demands and competition. Craftsmen found themselves caught between the old guild-controlled, tightly regulated systems and emerging market forces that prize speed and volume. Blacksmiths now had to navigate not just forging iron, but also the evolving economics of supply and demand. While guilds still held sway, their control began to wane as new production models emerged, including workshops with hired laborers and early proto-factories. One significant innovation during this time was the increased use of water-powered trip hammers. These machines, powered by water wheels, delivered powerful, repetitive hammer blows, freeing smiths from the exhaustion of manual hammering. The mechanization of forging represented a seismic shift, a precursor to the Industrial Revolution. centuries later. These trip hammers allowed for higher output and more uniform metal products, facilitating the production of larger quantities of nails, tools, and even weapons. Historians still argue about how widespread and impactful this technology was across different regions, but its influence on production methods is undeniable. Amid these changes, the blacksmith's traditional status in society began to decline. As mass production grew, individual smiths lost some of their unique craftsmanship aura. However, specialized smiths, such as armorers and cutlers, retained prestige by focusing on high-quality or luxury items. Wealthy patrons commissioned elaborate weapons and armor not just for protection but as symbols of status, decorated with intricate engravings and gilding. This decorative aspect of metalwork expanded, blurring the lines between craftsmanship and art. Some smiths became artisans in a more modern sense, their workshops resembling studios where innovation and aesthetics intertwined. A quirky side note from this era involves the rise of clocksmiths, specialists who crafted complex mechanical clocks, a far cry from horseshoes and plows. This niche required not just forging skills, but also precision engineering, and it marked the broadening of metallurgical knowledge beyond traditional blacksmithing. The expertise in making tiny, accurate gears helped pave the way for later advancements in machinery and technology. The blacksmith's legacy diversified in unexpected directions, spawning new crafts and professions that shaped modern industry. The social upheavals of the time, including wars, plagues, and religious transformations, also influenced the blacksmith's world. Labor shortages after the Black Death sometimes gave smiths more bargaining power, but the constant disruptions also meant unstable demand. The 100 Years' War, for instance, created spikes in demand for weapons and armor, while peacetime brought slumps. Guilds struggled to maintain control in these volatile times, and new economic models slowly eroded their influence. Historians still debate how much guild decline was due to economic forces versus internal corruption and rigidity. Working conditions remained tough. Despite mechanization, smiths were exposed to noise, heat, and hazardous fumes. Attempts to improve health and safety were minimal, and chronic injuries were common. The long hours and physical strain made smithing a dangerous occupation, and many smiths suffered from respiratory diseases and joint problems. Some city regulations tried to limit forge operations in densely populated areas due to smoke and fire hazards, pushing smiths to the urban outskirts. This relocation affected their social integration and economic opportunities. In agriculture, smiths continued to innovate, producing more efficient plows, hoes, and scythes that helped farmers boost productivity. The feedback loop between farming and smithing accelerated as population growth increased food demand, driving a need for better tools. Smiths also made important contributions to transportation by forging horseshoes and parts for carts and wagons, enabling more reliable travel and trade. This connectivity helped fuel economic growth, urbanization, and cultural exchange. Interestingly, some smiths became local celebrities, revered for their skill and knowledge, sometimes believed to possess secret knowledge or magical powers due to their command of fire and metal. Folklore often depicts smiths as mysterious figures, sometimes tricksters or healers, highlighting the cultural significance attached to their craft. This mystique survived even as industrialization began to render the traditional smith obsolete, a reminder of their deep roots in human history. By the dawn of the Renaissance, blacksmithing was simultaneously embracing new technologies and traditions, caught between centuries-old guild rules and the modernizing forces sweeping Europe. This complex, often contradictory situation set the stage for the next phase of history, where metallurgy would become a cornerstone of industrial society, leaving behind the smoky forges of the medieval world. You step deeper into the shifting world of late medieval blacksmithing, where the pressures of innovation and tradition collide in a dance as fiery as the forge itself. Imagine the clang of hammer on anvil echoing through the narrow cobbled streets, but now the rhythm begins to change, faster, louder, more mechanical. You, the blacksmith, are no longer just the master of fire and iron. You're becoming a pioneer on the frontier of early industry, navigating the uncharted waters between craftsmanship and mass production. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to share your location and local time too. It's always fascinating to know where my fellow night owls are tuning in from. Now, as your fan hums softly in the background, let's slip back into this medieval world that's starting to hum with new energy and complexity. This section plunges into the rising tide of mechanization and the growing impact of commerce on the blacksmith's trade. Water-powered forges and trip hammers, once rare novelties, begin to spread more widely, transforming production speed and scale. These machines allow for forging nails, horseshoes, and basic tools with unprecedented efficiency, giving some smiths a competitive edge but also threatening the livelihood of traditional hammer wielders. The mechanized hammers could strike dozens of blows per minute, far outpacing any human smith, but they required new skills to operate and maintain. This shift sparked tensions within guilds, where old masters worried about the erosion of artisanal quality and the potential loss of control over the trade. Guilds, once the gatekeepers of knowledge, standards, and economic power, faced mounting challenges. The rise of proto-industrial workshops, employing multiple smiths and apprentices under a single master, complicated traditional guild structures. Merchants, increasingly important in late medieval towns, sought to maximize output and profits, sometimes clashing with guild demands for quality control and restricted competition. Historians still argue about how these economic pressures contributed to the gradual decline of guild authority, but the trend toward freer markets and capitalist enterprise was unmistakable. In parallel, the variety of metal goods produced by smiths expanded significantly. Beyond the staple horseshoes and agricultural tools, smiths crafted more specialized items such as hinges, locks, cooking pots, and even early firearms components. The introduction of gunpowder weapons in Europe during this period was a game-changer, forcing smiths to adapt their skills and materials. Making gun barrels, triggers, and armor-piercing weapons required precision and new metallurgical knowledge. Some smiths specialized as armorers, honing skills to create better protection against these evolving weapons. Yet with the rise of firearms, full-plate armor's dominance waned, signaling a subtle shift in the blacksmith's role in warfare. The social status of smiths also transformed. While still respected, many blacksmiths found themselves working more as employees or small business owners rather than revered village artisans. Urbanization brought them closer to markets, but also increased competition. Yet some smiths thrived, becoming wealthy entrepreneurs or respected craftsmen, renowned for high-quality work. Quirky historical tidbits include stories of smiths doubling as tinkers or traveling metalworkers, moving from town to town to ply their trade, sometimes carrying exotic knowledge or secret techniques learned on their journeys. Working conditions, despite technological advances, remained harsh and hazardous. The relentless heat, smoke, and toxic fumes of coal and charcoal fires continued to take a toll on health. Accidents with heavy machinery and hot metal were common. Some towns began to enact regulations to curb smoke and noise pollution, pushing smiths further from city centres. This separation could isolate smiths socially, but also protected urban residents from the forge's dangers. Interestingly, smiths were among the first to experience industrial occupational hazards, an early lesson in the costs of mechanization. Blacksmithing also intersected with culture and folklore, retaining a magical aura. Stories of smiths as wielders of elemental power persisted, sometimes blending with emerging Renaissance humanism and early scientific thought. The smith's forge remained a metaphor for transformation, creativity, and even spiritual renewal. This cultural persistence shows how deeply embedded the blacksmith was in medieval and early modern consciousness, despite the changing economic realities. By the end of this transitional era, blacksmithing stood at a crossroads. Traditional forging methods continued alongside emerging mechanized processes, and the smith's role broadened from mere craftsman to entrepreneur, technician, and cultural icon. These changes paved the way for the coming centuries, where iron, and steel would underpin the engines of modern industry and reshape society itself. But for now, you remain in that smoky workshop, hammer in hand, caught between the flickering shadows of the past and the bright, uncertain dawn of the future. You follow the smoky trail of history further into the late medieval period, where the blacksmith's forge becomes not just a place of work, but a hub of community life and social interaction. Picture yourself leaning against the worn wooden doorframe of a bustling smithy in a busy market town, the scent of burning coal mingling with the earthy aroma of leather and wood, the rhythmic clang of hammer strikes blending into the town's ambient soundtrack. Before you get too comfy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's a little reminder that we're all on this sleepy history journey together. Now, settle in as the fan hums softly, and let's wander through the everyday life of the medieval blacksmith, where sparks fly and stories unfold in equal measure. This section explores the blacksmith's role as a central figure in medieval community life, where the forge was a gathering place for gossip, news, and social bonding. Blacksmiths often doubled as informal town historians, passing down oral traditions and local lore alongside their metalwork. The smithy was a crossroads of information, where farmers, merchants, soldiers, and townsfolk mingled, sharing tales and tidbits that shaped communal identity. Historians still debate just how influential smiths were in shaping public opinion, but their role as social nodes was undoubtedly significant. The day-to-day routine of a blacksmith involved far more than just hammering metal. Managing apprentices, negotiating with clients, and sourcing raw materials demanded a complex set of skills. Markets and fairs were critical for acquiring iron ore, charcoal, and tools, and for selling finished products. The arrival of imported goods, such as Scandinavian steel or Italian-made locks, created new challenges and opportunities for local smiths. The balancing act between maintaining tradition and embracing innovation defined many smiths' careers. Within the smithy, apprenticeships were intense and often grueling. Young boys learned the craft through long hours of observation and hard labor, gradually mastering the delicate balance of fire control, hammer technique, and metal shaping. Quirky anecdotes tell of apprentices accidentally melting their first shoe or setting the forge ablaze, moments of chaos that became rites of passage. Some smiths were known to be strict taskmasters, while others were surprisingly nurturing, fostering a sense of family within the workshop walls. The products of the blacksmith were everywhere, from the horseshoes clacking on cobblestones to the nails holding together timber-framed houses, from the cooking utensils in kitchens to the locks securing valuables. The variety and ubiquity of metal goods made the blacksmith indispensable, but also left him vulnerable to shifts in demand. Economic downturns or crop failures could reduce the need for new tools and repairs, while wars or construction booms could send orders soaring. This precarious balance shaped the smith's fortunes and stress levels alike. Superstition and ritual also surrounded the smith's work. Many smiths followed customs believed to protect their forge and family from bad luck or evil spirits. Some wore charms or kept special stones in the workshop. Others recited prayers or performed small ceremonies when working on important commissions, like wedding rings or weapons. These practices reveal the deep intertwining of craft, belief, and daily life in medieval times. In addition to their social and economic roles, smiths often held semi-magical status in folklore. Tales of enchanted swords or unbreakable armor reinforced the idea of the smith as a keeper of secret knowledge and power. This mystique was a double-edged sword, granting respect but also suspicion. In some regions, smiths were thought to possess healing abilities or control over fire itself, adding layers of meaning to their labor. Finally, this section touches on the evolving architecture of smithies themselves. Workshops adapted to new tools and materials, with changes in hearth design, ventilation, and workspace layout improving efficiency and safety. The transition from open fires to bellows and the eventual introduction of water-powered mechanisms reshaped the smithy's physical and social environment. These changes reflected broader shifts in medieval urban planning and technology adoption. As you step back from the glowing forge, you sense that the blacksmith's story is not just about metal and fire, but about community, resilience, and adaptation. Their workshops were not isolated caves of labor, but vibrant centers of life and culture, echoing the complexities of a changing medieval world. And as the embers fade to a gentle glow, you feel the pulse of history, steady, unyielding, and alive. You find yourself drawn into the quieter, more personal aspects of a medieval blacksmith's life, where the clang of hammer and anvil fades slightly to reveal the stories behind the man, or sometimes woman, behind the forge. Imagine a chilly evening outside the smithy, where the heat from the fire spills out onto the cobblestones, mixing with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to share your location and local time in the comments too. It makes this sleepy history journey feel a little more connected. Now relax into this softer side of history, where the blacksmith's personal struggles and joys come to life in the fading light. This section delves into the family and domestic life of blacksmiths, revealing a world often overshadowed by their public work. The smith's home was frequently attached to the workshop or just a stone's throw away, blending the lines between labor and leisure. Family members, especially wives and children, played crucial supporting roles, from managing finances and clients to preparing meals and caring for apprentices. Life was a constant juggling act between the fiery demands of the forge and the needs of hearth and home. The blacksmith's long, arduous days left little time for rest or recreation, yet community gatherings, festivals, and religious observances offered moments of respite and connection. You can picture a smith sitting beside a crackling fire after sunset, sharing a tankard of ale while swapping stories or jokes with neighbors. Humor was an essential balm against the daily grind. One legendary tale involves a smith's apprentice who accidentally nailed his own boot to the workshop floor, much to everyone's amusement and mild exasperation. Marriage and family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Wives of smiths often came from artisan or merchant families themselves, bringing valuable networks and skills to the partnership. Some were deeply involved in the business, overseeing apprentices or managing the smithy's accounts. Others tended the garden and household, producing food and herbs that supplemented the family's income. The raising of children in such a demanding environment required resilience and cooperation, with older siblings sometimes taking on apprenticeships early to help. Despite the vital roles women played, their contributions have often been overlooked in historical records. Historians still argue whether female blacksmiths were common or rare, but some evidence suggests that women occasionally took up the hammer, especially in the absence or death of their husbands. These stories challenge the assumption that smithing was an exclusively male domain and invite us to reconsider medieval gender roles in craftwork. Economic pressures and competition also affected family life. Blacksmiths faced fluctuating demand, competition from imported goods, and sometimes guild restrictions limiting their freedom to trade or expand. These challenges could strain household finances and relationships. On the other hand, success brought prestige and opportunities for social mobility, allowing some smiths to purchase property or invest in new tools and apprentices. Health and safety were constant concerns. The smithy was a hazardous place, with risks of burns, respiratory problems from smoke, and injuries from sharp tools or heavy metal. Families often bore the emotional toll of these dangers, and medical knowledge of the time was limited. Remedies might involve a mix of herbal treatments, superstition, and prayer, reflecting the medieval worldview that combined practical and spiritual care. The blacksmith's reputation extended beyond his immediate locale. Travelers and traders brought news and fashions from afar, influencing styles of metalwork and business practices. Some smiths gained fame for particular specialties, like making fine swords, ornate locks, or delicate jewelry. Such renown could lead to lucrative commissions from nobility or clergy, though it also increased scrutiny and expectations. Cultural practices tied to smithing intersected with broader medieval beliefs. Rituals to protect the family and workshop as well as the symbolic meanings attached to metal objects, permeated daily life. Weddings, baptisms, and funerals might involve specially crafted items from the smithy, underscoring the craft's role in marking life's milestones. This interweaving of craft and culture highlights the blacksmith's unique position as both artisan and community cornerstone. As the evening deepens and the forge's glow softens, you glimpse the human side of the medieval smith. The hopes, fears, struggles, and triumphs that shaped not just their work, but their very existence. Their story is one of endurance, creativity, and the simple but profound act of shaping metal and life alike. The morning light filters through the small windows of the medieval blacksmith's workshop, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sun that cut across the soot-covered floor. You step into this world, feeling the cool metal tools in your hands, and hearing the rhythmic tapping of hammer on anvil echoing off stone walls. Before you settle deeper into this tale, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time below. Now, breathe in the sense of coal and hot iron as we explore how medieval blacksmiths mastered the evolving technologies of their trade while wrestling with tradition, innovation, and the relentless demands of their customers. By the 14th century, blacksmithing was not just about raw strength, but a sophisticated craft that combined art, science, and cunning. You imagine a smith meticulously shaping an iron horseshoe, knowing that every curve, every nail hole, must be precise to protect the horse and rider. The development of new tools like the bellows, water-powered hammers, and specialized tongs allowed smiths to increase productivity and tackle more complex projects. But these innovations came slowly, often resisted by traditionalists who feared the loss of artisanal quality or their place in the guild hierarchy. Guilds were powerful, medieval institutions controlling not only the training and quality of smiths, but also their social and economic lives. As you watch an apprentice carefully learning the trade, you realize this was more than just a job. It was a lifelong commitment steeped in ceremony, secrecy, and rivalry. Apprenticeship could last 7 years or more, during which the young smith-to-be lived with the master's family, learning by observation and hard practice. Success meant the chance to become a journeyman and eventually a master, with the right to open one's own workshop. However, not all smiths were part of guilds, especially in rural areas or on the fringes of medieval kingdoms. Here, smiths often had to fend for themselves, negotiating with local lords, peasants, and merchants. This independence came with risks, but also freedom. Freedom to experiment, to adapt, and sometimes to flout guild rules. The tension between centralized control and local autonomy was a defining feature of medieval craft economies. Materials were another crucial concern. Iron ore had to be sourced, smelted, and purified, a process requiring knowledge passed down through generations. Blacksmiths also worked with steel, bronze, and even precious metals for jewelry and fine tools. You might find a smith mixing alloys to achieve the perfect balance of hardness and flexibility, a process as much art as chemistry. The supply chains were complex and often precarious, affected by wars, trade embargoes, and natural disasters. Historians still argue whether these factors or local innovation had the greater impact on the evolution of smithing techniques. The customer base ranged from peasants needing nails and farming tools to nobles commissioning elaborate weapons and armor. Demand fluctuated seasonally and politically. Times of peace might bring more agricultural tools, while wars spiked the need for swords, helmets, and horseshoes. This variety required smiths to be adaptable and shrewd business people, balancing quality with speed to stay competitive. Some smiths became renowned artisans, attracting patrons from distant lands and accumulating wealth and influence. The smithy was also a place of social exchange and rumor, where news of battles, alliances, and royal decrees spread. You can imagine the smith overhearing plans from passing knights or trading gossip with traveling merchants, their ears attuned not just to the clang of metal, but the pulse of the wider world. In many ways, the smithy was a microcosm of medieval society itself embodying its contradictions, ambitions, and daily realities. Health and safety remained persistent concerns. Despite advances in tools and techniques, the work was physically demanding and dangerous. Burns, cuts, and respiratory problems were common, and medical care was rudimentary at best. You might catch the smith carefully tending a blister or wrapping, a wound with herbal poultices, mixing practical knowledge with superstition. The harsh conditions underline just how tough and resilient these craftsmen had to be. Culturally, blacksmithing carried symbolic weight. Metalworkers were often associated with mystical powers, able to transform raw earth into objects of strength and beauty. Folklore and superstition imbued the smith with an almost magical status. Some believed the forge fire had healing or protective properties. Others feared curses linked to the weapons made. This duality of respect and fear added a fascinating dimension to the smith's social role. By the day's end, as the forge cooled and the last sparks died down, you see a craftsman who was not only a maker of metal, but a maker of community, culture, and continuity. The medieval blacksmith was a vital thread in the tapestry of history, shaping not just iron, but the very lives and stories of those around him. You wake to the low rumble of the village stirring outside, the faint clang of metal, a steady reminder that the blacksmith's forge never truly sleeps. As you step closer to the glowing hearth, you're drawn into the complex world of medieval metallurgy, where the boundaries between science and art blur under the hammer's steady rhythm. The blacksmith's skill wasn't merely physical, it was intellectual, a blend of trial, error, and inherited wisdom passed through generations. You can almost feel the heat radiating from the fire as you consider how iron, once a dull, brittle rock, was transformed into everything from horseshoes to swords, nails to intricate locks. This was an age before modern chemistry, yet blacksmiths developed a keen, if empirical, understanding of materials and processes that could rival today's laboratories. Remember to pause, like the video, and subscribe if you appreciate this journey into the past. Feel free to drop your current location and time in the comments. Everywhere has its own story. Now, let's slide deeper into the mysteries of medieval metalworking, a world where a single spark could change everything. The process of creating quality ironwork began with smelting, a delicate operation where raw ore was heated in a bloomery furnace to extract usable iron. This furnace was a relatively simple structure, but demanded precise control of temperature and airflow. You imagine the blacksmith adjusting bellows with steady hands, watching for the subtle color changes that signaled readiness. The bloom, an irregular lump of iron and slag, required further working to remove impurities. This refining step, known as forging, was labor-intensive and demanded constant hammering and reheating. Historians still argue whether early medieval smiths had access to steel, or if their weapons were primarily iron with variable carbon content, a debate that continues to influence how we understand medieval warfare capabilities. Steel was a prized material, stronger and more flexible than pure iron, but producing it consistently was a challenge. The smith's mastery lay in controlling carbon absorption during smelting and forging. You picture a master smith carefully layering and folding metal, a technique that resembles early forms of pattern welding, which produced blades both beautiful and deadly. These processes were closely guarded secrets, passed within families or guilds, giving some smiths reputations bordering on legendary. The forging of Damascus steel, famous for its distinctive patterns and exceptional strength, remains shrouded in mystery. Some scholars believe the original techniques were lost to time, with only tantalizing clues remaining in medieval texts. Beyond weaponry, blacksmiths crafted essential household items, from cooking pots to locks and keys. Each required different approaches and levels of precision. For example, lockmaking was a complex art involving tiny, precisely cut components, demonstrating that the medieval smith was as much a mechanic as a metalsmith. The development of locks improved security in castles and towns, playing a subtle but vital role in medieval society's evolution toward greater personal property and law enforcement. This opens a scholarly debate on how technology influenced medieval concepts of ownership and control, revealing that blacksmiths were not just artisans, but agents of social change. Tools for agriculture were another major part of the blacksmith's output, directly impacting food production and, by extension, population growth. Iron plowshares, sickles, and scythes allowed farmers to work heavier soils and harvest more efficiently. You can almost feel the rhythm of rural life pulsing through the metalwork. Seasonal cycles marked by the demand for new tools, repairs, and innovations. The blacksmith's role here was indispensable, linking technology with survival. Yet, despite their importance, smiths often remained socially ambiguous figures, sometimes admired, sometimes mistrusted for their mysterious craft. The economic life of the blacksmith was complex and precarious. Guild regulations often dictated prices and quality standards, limiting the smith's freedom, but also protecting them from unfair competition. You envision the tension in village squares and town markets, where smiths negotiated not only with customers but also with powerful guildmasters and local officials. Political shifts, wars, and trade disruptions could drastically affect material availability and demand. The smith's workshop was a small but vital node in larger economic networks stretching across regions and even countries, illustrating how local craftspeople were connected to global forces even in medieval times. Health hazards shadowed the blacksmith's workday. The intense heat, inhalation of fumes, and risk of injury were ever-present dangers. Medical knowledge was limited, and many smiths relied on folk remedies and superstition to treat burns and wounds. You might imagine a smith applying a poultice, of herbs learned from a family elder, or wearing talismans believed to ward off injury or bad luck. This blend of practical knowledge and mystical belief colored the smith's world, adding a rich layer to their lived experience. Historians continue to debate how much these beliefs influence the actual practice of medieval crafts. On the cultural front, blacksmiths occupied a fascinating space between everyday labor and mythic symbolism. Stories and legends often portrayed smiths as creators of magical weapons or as holders of secret knowledge. In some cultures, smiths were seen as mediators between the natural and supernatural realms, their fire and metalworking symbolizing transformation and power. You might recall folklore from various parts of Europe depicting smiths forging swords that could cut through anything or creating talismans with protective magic. This cultural backdrop highlights how blacksmithing was not just a trade, but a vital thread woven into the spiritual fabric of medieval life. As the day fades, the blacksmith's workshop grows quiet, the forge cooling, but the legacy burning bright. These craftsmen shaped not only metal, but the very fabric of medieval society, through tools, weapons, and cultural symbolism. You leave this world richer for the journey, a reminder that even the most seemingly mundane crafts have stories worth telling, and that history's quietest voices often carry the deepest echoes. You find yourself stepping into the twilight hours of medieval life, where the blacksmith's role begins to intersect with emerging urban environments and changing social dynamics. The transition from rural villages to bustling medieval towns created new demands and challenges for smiths, pushing their craft beyond simple toolmaking toward more specialized and commercialized production. You notice the faint scent of soot and metal in crowded market streets. Hear the distant clang of hammers echoing from multiple forges, each catering to a diverse clientele. It's a world in flux, where tradition meets innovation, and the blacksmith's work becomes a critical component of medieval urban economies. As always, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy this historical journey, and share your local time and place in the comments. Each adds to the global tapestry of our story. Now, let's dive into the transformations shaping the medieval blacksmith's life as towns grow and trade flourishes. With urbanization came guilds that formalized blacksmithing into organized professions. These guilds regulated quality, controlled apprenticeships, and wielded political influence within towns. You imagine the intense rivalry and camaraderie among smiths, where master craftsmen guarded their secrets while mentoring eager apprentices. Guild halls served not only as professional centers, but also as social hubs, hosting feasts, rituals, and even religious observances. This institutionalization marks a significant evolution in the blacksmith's status, from solitary rural artisan to an urban professional bound by laws and customs. Historians still debate how much guilds stifled innovation versus protected craft standards, a tension that shaped medieval craftsmanship for centuries. The expanding range of products reflected the complexity of urban life. Blacksmiths produced everything from horseshoes for city-mounted guards to ornate ironwork decorating churches, town halls, and wealthy merchants' homes. Decorative iron grills, hinges, and locks became status symbols, blending functionality with artistry. You can almost trace the iron filigree patterns with your eyes, marveling at the skill required to bend and weld cold metal into such intricate forms. This artistic side of blacksmithing challenges the stereotype of the forge as a purely utilitarian space, revealing a rich culture of craftsmanship where form and function intertwined beautifully. Trade routes expanded the reach of medieval. Blacksmiths far beyond their hometowns, imported materials like high-quality steel or exotic alloys introduced new possibilities and sparked demand for specialized knowledge. You envision caravans and ships carrying iron goods across Europe and beyond, connecting smiths with distant cultures and technologies. This cross-pollination of techniques fueled innovation, but also competition. Some smiths adapted quickly, while others clung to traditional methods. The flow of materials and ideas complicates the picture of medieval craftsmanship, suggesting a globalized world more interconnected than commonly assumed. Yet, this period also exposed smiths to new risks. The increased demand for weapons, especially during frequent medieval conflicts, pushed many blacksmiths into wartime production under pressure and strict quotas. You sense the tension in workshops as smiths hurried to produce armor and blades, knowing lives depended on their work. But the demand wasn't purely martial. Peacetime construction boomed as cities expanded, requiring nails, tools, and hardware for buildings and infrastructure. The dual role of the smith as maker of both tools of war and pillars of society underlines the complex social position they occupied. Scholars debate how these pressures influence the ethics and identity of blacksmiths, an open question reflecting broader medieval societal tensions. Socially, smiths occupied an ambivalent place. Guild membership brought prestige and economic security, yet the mysterious nature of their craft sometimes invited suspicion. Folk beliefs persisted, viewing smiths as wielders of strange, possibly magical powers over fire and metal. In some regions, blacksmiths were called upon for supernatural protection or rituals, while elsewhere they faced accusations of witchcraft or dealings with dark forces. This contradictory perception highlights the complex cultural meanings surrounding blacksmithing, blending respect, fear, and fascination in equal measure. You can almost hear whispered stories in shadowed taverns about the smith who forged a sword that never dulled or a horseshoe that brought good luck. Reminders that the medieval mind was never far from myth. Health and working conditions remained harsh despite urban advances. Workshops crowded into narrow streets filled with smoke and dust, exposing smiths and apprentices to long-term respiratory problems and frequent injuries. Medical care was rudimentary, and many smiths relied on folk remedies or simply endured pain as part of the job. You imagine the stoic grimace of a smith nursing a burn or a crushed finger while hammering out a crucial piece of armor. These hardships were often hidden behind the public image of the master craftsman, a reminder that medieval professions were brutal and unrelenting. As the sun sets, you reflect on how the medieval blacksmith was both an artisan and a vital cog in the social, economic, and cultural machinery of their time. From rural villages to bustling towns, their craft shaped lives in countless ways, blending tradition with innovation, myth with reality. The story of the medieval blacksmith is a window into a world where metalwork was much more than a job. It was a key to survival, status, and even magic. And as you close your eyes, imagine the steady rhythm of hammer on anvil, a heartbeat of history echoing through time. You move deeper into the closing chapter of this medieval journey, sensing the weight of centuries pressing down like the heat of the forge you've been visiting. The life of the medieval blacksmith, as you've experienced, was not just about metal and fire. It was about survival, skill, and a strange blend of artistry and raw necessity. As towns evolved and societies shifted toward the Renaissance, the blacksmith's role started to change, slowly but surely, foreshadowing the end of the medieval era and the dawn of new crafts and technologies. You picture yourself standing amid the clanging of a final hammer blow, the forge's glow dimming in the twilight of history. Now, before we fully close the book on this story, remember to hit that like button and subscribe if you've enjoyed this trip through time, and don't forget to share where you're listening from. It connects us all across the centuries. Let's explore the final transformations that shaped the blacksmith's legacy as the medieval world faded. By the late Middle Ages, the rise of industrialization began to cast long shadows over traditional blacksmithing. Mechanized tools, water-powered hammers, and early foundries threatened to replace the solitary smith with mass production. You can almost hear the tension between proud smiths and emerging factory owners, a conflict between craft and efficiency that historians still debate in terms of economic and social impact. The artisanal pride of blacksmiths clashed with the relentless march of machines, forcing many to adapt or fade into obscurity. This transition wasn't overnight, but rather a slow, grinding shift that altered medieval crafts forever. However, the medieval blacksmith's influence did not vanish. Instead, it evolved. Their knowledge of metallurgy and forging laid the groundwork for future advancements in metalworking. You imagine early scientists and engineers building on centuries of smithing wisdom, leading to innovations that would eventually power the Industrial Revolution. The blacksmith's hammer echoes metaphorically in modern factories and workshops, a testament to the enduring legacy of their craft. Socially, the guilds that once held tight control began to lose their grip as new economic models emerged. The rise of capitalist markets and changing political landscapes shifted power away from medieval guild structures. Yet, many blacksmiths found ways to reinvent themselves, blending traditional skills with new demands, such as locksmithing, toolmaking, and even artistic metalwork for emerging Renaissance tastes. You picture workshops transforming, apprentices learning new trades, and smiths adjusting to a world where the old rules no longer applied. At the same time, the cultural mystique of the blacksmith persisted. Stories, myths, and folklore about the smith's magical touch continued to circulate, now tinged with nostalgia rather than fear. You might recall tales of the smith god figures from Norse and Celtic mythologies, echoing faintly in the popular imagination long after the forges cooled. This symbolic resonance kept the blacksmith's image alive as both a literal and metaphorical creator, shaping not only metal, but the very fabric of society. Health and working conditions began to improve gradually, although medieval harshness lingered in memory. By the Renaissance, some smiths had access to better tools, ventilation, and even rudimentary protective gear. Yet the daily grind of hammering still demanded stamina and resilience, qualities that never really went out of style. You imagine the proud gaze of a master smith who, despite changing times, held fast to the core of their craft, shaping raw metal into tools and treasures. As your journey winds down, consider the blacksmith's place in history, an uncelebrated hero whose work was essential but often taken for granted. Their story is one of sweat and sparks, innovation and tradition, shadowed by hardship, yet illuminated by creativity. The medieval blacksmith embodies the timeless human struggle to transform nature into culture, chaos into order, fire into form. And as you prepare to drift off, let the steady beat of hammer on anvil lull you into a calm sleep, a rhythmic reminder that history is alive, even in the quietest moments.